Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy fanfics, back with the amazing fanfiction. This is the third part of What if Luffy ate Icy-Mag Devil Fruit and returned to Smash Grand Line? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Luffy was currently hiking the treacherous terrain up to the tallest Drum Island peak. On the way, he could sense the bunny creatures that had attacked him the first time around, but constantly blasting a low-level haki seemed to ward them off. All of the Lapons kept their distance, feeling like the creature that ran through their territory was an apex predator. Luffy was starting to wonder what he would find when he got to the peak. The unfortunate case was that Wapol would likely be there enjoying his retaken kingdom. But what would happen to Chopper and Dr. Kira if that was the case? Would they be long gone hiding out in one of the other villages, or would they be imprisoned up in the castle? Eventually, he finally reached the base of the giant mountain. He had made much better time than last time, because of his new devil fruit luckily. On top of that, he was able to keep Robin at a much better temperature for the weather. Now he only needed to climb up the mountain. He had an idea that should help though. Using his icy fruit powers, he formed his hand into ice picks and gave his feet sharpened toes. This way he could climb up this sheer cliff with little issue hopefully. As he climbed, he felt Robin begin to stir from her sleep. Why? Robin began weakly. What is it, Robin? Luffy asked concerned. Why would you do all this? Just for me? I'm not worth it, Robin said, going in and out of consciousness. Robin, get some rest. I already told you you're my nakama. To me that makes you worth any hardship, Luffy said, continuing to climb his way up the mountain. Robin nodded back off to sleep without responding. He wondered if it was likely she even knew what she had asked, because of delirious she was. Gritting his teeth, he redoubled his efforts. There was no time to lose. Robin needed him. Up in the castle, Wapol was currently sitting on his throne laughing. Finally, he was back where he belonged. His people had needed a bit of reminding at who was in charge, but that was all right. After all, a little violence and destruction was always a good way to make sure useless people knew their place. He had been a little mad to see that two people had started squatting in his castle. However, the old hag was now sitting in his dungeon, and the little furry monster was proving to be very interesting. Yesterday he had proven to be great entertainment as he pitted the creature against a bunch of his men. Eventually, the little freak had proven too much for his men. After all, he seemed to have eaten a devil fruit. However, they had gotten in plenty of injuries on the creature. Wapol had decided today he would fight him personally. After all, what better way to deal with that reindeer creature than to turn him into his next meal? Wapol thought with a cruel smirk. King Wapol, I have an update on those straw hats I mentioned. It seems they have landed and are currently helping out that village you raised yesterday. Just like I said, it seems they are here to usurp your authority, Mr. 3 said calmly, drinking out of a teacup. Wapol grimaced at that. Another group of pirates here to try and take what was his. This time, however, he was ready for them. Chess, Kiramarimo, time to get moving. I want the two of you and those allies of Mr. 3 to deal with the pirates in town. I want no survivors. Hell, raise the village while you're at it. Those bastards should have learned their lesson, but now they are letting pirates roam about my kingdom, Wapol shouted to his men. Chess and Kiramarimo nodded while looking towards the members of Baroque Works. Miss Golden Week and Mr. 5 joined them as they left the castle. Mr. 3 smirked to himself. He would use the Drum Kingdom fools and Mr. 5 to take down those straw hats. Miss Golden Week would keep an eye on the situation, and he wouldn't even have to lift a finger. Then when all was said and done, he would kill Mr. 5 and could report back to Mr. 0. All he had to do was wait for the pieces to fall into place now. He took another sip as he waited for it all to unfold. Luffy finally hauled himself and Robin up to the top of the mountain and looked at the castle in front of him. Unfortunately, he could see Wapol's men guarding the main gate. He would have to find a way to sneak in. Turning himself into ice, he tried his best to blend into the environment. Luckily, he could still maintain heat to Robin while freezing himself. He snuck around the side and began inspecting the rooms on the first floor. So far, he only came across the soldiers' barracks, but there was a section of bars closer to the ground. Looking closer, it seemed he had found some prison cells. If he were lucky, the doctor and Chopper would both be here still. Soon he found one with a bruised old woman chained to the wall. That wasn't a good sign, but at least she was still alive. He melted the bars with his hands and jumped inside. Dr. Kiriha looked up in surprise. Just what the hell are you doing here, brat? And who is that on your back? Kiriha asked the man who had just broken into her cell. Dr. Kiriha, right. I need your help. You see, my friend here is sick. We were on a prehistoric island and a bug bit her. Well, kid, as you might be able to tell, I don't have any medicine on me to help you. So how about you free me and we will work on helping your friend? Kiriha asked as she jangled the cuffs around her wrists. Luffy nodded and using his ice powers froze some of the links and with a solid hit to each side shattered the chain, freeing Kiriha. Kiriha started to fall to the ground, but Luffy caught her. Thanks, kid. Well, if you want me to have a look at your friend, I'm going to need to get to my lab. Not only that, but I am going to need my assistant as well. Do you think you've got what it takes to fight any of Wapol's men on the way there? Kiraha said as she stroked her wrists that had been rubbed raw by the chains. Yeah, do you know where your assistant is? Luffy asked. He was glad at least Kiraha seemed to know Chopper was still alive. If he had learned that one of his nakama had died before he had ever gotten to meet them again. Well, best not to think on that. No, unfortunately. I know Chopper's not kept down here, but I know that Wapol plans on killing him today. Let's get to my lab first. And I can see to your friend while you find my assistant, Kiraha said as she began walking over to the bars of her cell. Luffy walked over to the cell and this time using his magma powers melted the lock to the cell and gave the door a push as it gave way. Now that they were free, Kiraha led the way down the hall as Luffy followed. Kiraha was surprised to see what looked like 2 devil fruits being used by this kid but made no comment on it. I have to say, kid, you have some great timing. How did you get all the way up here anyway? I figured after all the trouble Wapol went to secure his kingdom he would have the lifts shut down. Kiraha asked instead. Well, I climbed up the side of the mountain. I didn't want to have to fight with Robin here on my back, so I figured climbing would be the best way, Luffy said. Although now that she had mentioned it, maybe using a lift would have been easier, though it would have likely attracted more attention, so maybe not after all. You climbed the tallest peak in the Drum Kingdom. You must be one crazy kid, Kiraha said surprised. Luffy chuckled at that. Probably, but I knew I could handle it. Luffy said this while giving Kiraha a small smile. Luffy had 2 nakama on the line, and there was no challenge one mountain could provide that would keep him from making sure they were safe. As they reached the entrance of the prison, though, she gestured to Luffy to keep silent. Taking a quick peek, she noted 2 guards posted there. Although with their slouched postures it seemed they weren't too worried about a possible prison break. Their mistake. She pointed to either side of the wall and mouthed to Luffy, "Guard." Luffy nodded his head and stepped in front of her. Walking out the entrance, he quickly grabbed both guards and smashed their heads together, knocking them both unconscious. Luffy looked around for any other signs of trouble and gave Kiraha the signal to continue. Luckily, it seemed most of the guards were elsewhere because they encountered no more guards on their way to the lab. When they finally reached their destination, Luffy gently untied Robin from his back and set her on the bed, drawing the covers up to her chin. She was definitely worse than how she had been before their journey through the Drum Kingdom. Her face was completely flushed, and sweat was pouring off her, and her breath was labored. It reminded him too much of when Nami had been in this exact situation. But he had made it to the doctor, and now she would be able to help her. Do you have any idea where I might find your assistant? Luffy asked, turning to the doctor. Kiraha scratched her chin in thought. No, unfortunately. But I do know where he will be. She walked over to the window and pointed at the ground below. Yesterday I could hear as they pitted Chopper against the guardsmen. They plan on having him fight Wapol there at some point today as well, Kiraha said, looking to the strange man that had saved her. I would say wait for that to happen, but I heard what they were doing to Chopper yesterday, Kiraha said as she gripped her medical instruments tightly. He isn't in good shape right now, and he is probably scared and alone. Looking into the man's eyes, she pleaded, please save Chopper. I'll get to work on your nakama here right away, but save my assistant, please. He's all I've got left. Kiraha begged as tears began to trickle down her creased face. Luffy nodded, trying not to let any of his own tears peek through as he quickly walked away from her. Damn it, Luffy thought to himself. Whatever treatment Chopper had gotten had been even worse than he feared. Looking to Robin, he took off his hat. He set it on the bedpost and prepared to go search for Chopper. Luffy felt adrenaline race through his veins as he thought of his nakama imprisoned and injured. Wapol was going to get whatever he had inflicted on Chopper twice over. He covered the 2 doors in ice to keep them shut tight, and then created an ice wall to block off the remaining entry. Hopefully, anyone that walked by would think the doors had been frozen closed while the castle was abandoned. Luffy began heading down the hallway searching for Wapol and Chopper. He could only hope to get there soon. Inside the room, Kiraha focused back on her work. She would have to trust that the man would save Chopper now. Right now she had a patient to look after. Kiraha set about her research into what ailment this girl could have. A bug bite from an insect on an ancient island. Well, that certainly limits the possibilities. Back at the village, the people had finally begun settling the chaos that had been caused by Wapol's return. Most of the people had been treated at this point, and the most severe of which were in stable condition now thanks to the help of Kai. The Straw Hat Pirates were helping where they could, some helping people move the sick and injured while others kept watching for potential attacks. All of them were wondering about their captain and their newest crewmate. While none of them trusted the newcomer, they still hoped that Luffy got her the help she needed, especially Nami and Zoro considering what they knew about their captain. However, so far nothing else had gone wrong. No surprise visits from Wapol or his subordinates, which the villagers were glad for. The Straw Hat Pirates couldn't help but fear what this meant for their captain. If he encountered the entirety of Wapol's forces at the top of the mountain, well, they didn't doubt that Luffy would come out unharmed, but would Robin? Only time would tell. On the ship, Sanji and Nijiko had so far encountered no one. Nijiko was currently on deck training with her devil fruit powers. It had been strange to get used to being entirely made of rubber, but now it almost felt natural. Sanji busied himself in the kitchen cleaning what he could. Soon he would prepare food for him and Nijiko, but wondered if he should make more in case any of his crewmates came back. Eventually, he decided to cook the extra meals, seeing that one of them could likely run some food to the village if no one came to them. Finally, Nami was making charts of some of the islands they had visited. However, her heart wasn't in it as she found herself worrying about Luffy. She just hoped that he would come back soon and unharmed. Later that day, Zoro began to notice movement coming down one of the roads leading into the village. Was this it? He quickly alerted the other Straw Hats, who converged on the entrance to the town, blocking off whoever might be coming their way. Kaya continued helping the villagers, though, as she hoped the others would be enough to help keep them safe from harm's way. Eventually, the Straw Hats could see who was heading their way. 4 figures headed up a group of soldiers. One looked to be a small girl, and the other 3 were larger men. One had a bow, and another had strange black puffballs adorning his hands and cloak that matched his hair. The last one was a man they had met before, Mr. 5. When they reached the entrance, the large group stopped and looked at the pirates that had dared stop them from entering their own village. By order of King Wapol, this village is to be razed with all the people inside it executed for treason against the crown. Chess called out loudly. The villagers began to panic after hearing that. 2 of Wapol's best men as well as a band of soldiers. They wouldn't stand a chance if the Straw Hat pirates couldn't beat them. Well, we aren't going to let you into this village, Zoro said confidently while drawing his sword. So why don't you see if you can bring us down before you start worrying about harming the people of this town? Zoro placed the Wado Ikimonji in his mouth and glared at the newcomers. Vivi prepared her peacock slashers and began spinning them wildly. Alvida lifted up her mace and set it on her shoulder, laughing at the nervous expressions the soldiers seemed to have. Usopp was standing on one of the nearby roofs preparing to snipe anyone that got too close. He wouldn't let anyone come into this village and undo all the hard work Kaya has done healing all the villagers. All right, men. I want you to take this village and leave no survivors, Kirimurimo shouted to the soldiers. They looked around at each other nervously, but with no other choice began to run at the village, swords drawn. Zoro smirked as he ran forward to meet him. Many of the soldiers seemed to be looking at him in fear even as they raised their swords to attack. Alvida was close behind, running along. Unfortunately, due to the extreme cold, she couldn't use her devil fruit very effectively with all the thick winter clothing she was wearing. However, her mace was more than enough to deal with weaklings like these. Usopp had already begun firing off lead stars, knocking out soldiers left and right as he did so. A quarter of their force would be unconscious before they even reached the Straw Hats. Unfortunately, though, the soldiers were only a distraction. Currently, Miss Golden Week was mixing up a unique color of paint. This one was a combination of her red and black to create a blood red color that had a unique effect on those it was painted on. Usually, the red would only make others want to attack the painting itself. However, when the color was made darker, it had a different ability. It utilized the anger that would usually manifest from the red. But instead of making others angry, it would the person who was in direct contact with the paint angrier instead. It had the effect of ramping up adrenaline levels in a body, driving people to a fighting frenzy against their foes. Currently, Mr. 5, Chess, and Kirimurimo were receiving this drawing on their backs. With it, they should be more than enough for those pirates. Unknown to 3, however, was the unfortunate side effect of the paint should it be used for too long. Extended usage tended to put a person's heart into overdrive as the increased adrenaline continued to course through the body. Too long and the user's heart would give out. Ideal use for allies you intended to kill as soon as their purpose was fulfilled. Back on the mountain, Luffy began to notice some men gathering in the courtyard below. They were carrying a cage out which contained a precious nakama of his. Luffy opened up the window and jumped down into the snow. Staying low to the ground, Luffy made his way to the gathering of soldiers. Soon Wapol joined his men, laughing at the creature in the cage. "It's time I show you who is the true king of this castle." Gesturing to the cage, he yelled, "Release the beast. It is time for my supper," he said, grinning down at Chopper. Chopper limped out of his cage and glared at the humans around him. He had heard what they planned to do to him today, but he wasn't going to make it easy on the bastard. He shifted to his human form and prepared to fight. Chopper was surprised to see, though, that someone had appeared out of thin air in front of him. "Back off, Wapol," the stranger said. "Just who the hell do you think you are?" Wapol yelled back, looking at the interloper. "Wait a minute, are you one of those damned Straw Hats? I was warned about your group. No matter, it looks like I am going to have a feast today with you and the monster here," Wapol said, grinning cruelly. "You are going to have to get through me to get Chopper, and I promise you that won't ever happen," Luffy said, cracking his knuckles. "Why do you care so much about the hairball here? What's he ever done for you?" Wapol said, confused. It wasn't likely they knew each other, so why did he care what happened to him? "'Cause Chopper is going to be my nakama," Luffy said, grinning back at Chopper. Wapol looked at the two in front of him. You know what men open fire. He didn't have time for this. He wouldn't mind a bit of lead in his food after all. Chopper held his arms out in front of his face, prepared to block any shots that went for his head. He heard the shots rang out, but was surprised to see none of them hit him. Lowering his arms, he saw a barrier surrounding him. Touching it, he realized it was made of ice, and on the other side, he could see the strange man that had come to save him, the one who said he wanted to be his nakama. While his vision was obscured, he could see the many bullet holes scattered across his form. Chopper let out a cry as he slammed his hooves on the barrier. No, he cried out as he realized the stranger had given his life to save his. Why would someone do that for him? Then he realized that the bullet holes were shrinking, and soon he appeared to be completely healed. How is that possible? Chopper thought to himself. Luffy turned and seeing Chopper look at him gave him a smile. You sit this one out, buddy. I've got it from here. Chopper could only watch from the inside as he saw the man spring into action. He could hear bullets being fired, but they seemed to not affect the man. Each time he came into contact with one of the soldiers, ice sprang from the impact and froze the soldier where he stood. Soon, instead of fighting back, the men began to run, even with Wapol screaming at them to fight. They figured if it came to being killed by this man now or possibly being caught by Wapol later, well, the decision was easy. Eventually, it was just Wapol and Luffy facing off. Damn those cowards. I'll have every last one of them executed. Wapol shouted angrily. How dare they run away? Their king had given them explicit orders, and they had betrayed them. No matter, they would be executed like the traitors they were. Now though, he had to fight the pirate himself. Well, then King Wapol, it seems you have some problems with your workforce. Maybe I can lend a hand, Mr. 3 said as he walked out from the castle and headed towards the two. Luffy was surprised to see a member of Baroque Works here. Something about what happened at Whiskey Peak had changed the organization's plans. He realized that much when no attack at Little Garden had occurred. To see an alliance between Baroque Works and Wapol though was surprising. So the two of you versus me. It doesn't seem like a fair fight, Luffy said. Wapol grinned at the pirate's cowardice. It seemed he was finally learning that he was going to be on the losing side of this fight. Before he could respond though, Luffy spoke again. Maybe you could round up some more of your subordinates and make this fight a little more even for you. How does that sound? Luffy said, smirking at the two. Damn you, brat. I'll show you I'm not to be messed with, Wapol said. Allow me to offer my services, Mr. 3 said as he began to create hardened wax. Eat this, and I'm sure you will find your strength to increase drastically. My wax is harder than steel. Wapol began to scarf down the offered wax and was surprised at how tough it was. Combined with the cannons he had eaten today, he would be unstoppable. Munch munch factory, Wapol shouted as his body began to change. First, his arms formed into cannons, and then his body started to turn into the waxy substance that Mr. 3 had created. It felt like a thick armor now covered his body. Ready to give up, you punk, Wapol shouted to the pirate. Luffy just laughed as he powered up both his arms with magma. Tell me, Mr. 3, what happens when you expose wax to heat? Mr. 3's eyes widened as he looked at the magma pouring off his body. Why, you have 2 devil fruits, he asked, panicked at the development. What's going on, Mr. 3? Why are you so nervous? Wapol asked, looking towards his ally that was backing away. Mr. 3 began to turn and run but was stopped when Luffy suddenly appeared in front of him, terrifying the man. Leaving so soon, Galdino? Luffy asked, delivering a punch into his gut, dropping the man immediately. Once upon a time, Galdino had helped him out and even saved his life on another occasion, so he figured knocking him out quickly would be his way of paying that back. After all, Galdino was trying to kill him. It could only be so kind. Besides, Wapol was the one who Luffy had his eye on now. Having seen the state Chopper was in, he knew that Wapol deserved to feel some serious pain for what he had done to Chopper. Wapol saw Luffy turn his way, took a step back. He hadn't even seen the kid move, and he had knocked out Mr. 3 in an instant. Maybe he should have stayed away from his island until after this pirate had come through, but it was too late for that now. He quickly aimed both cannons at the Straw Hat Menace and opened fire. He watched as Luffy calmly sidestepped one projectile and caught the other before continuing his advance. Luffy crushed the cannonball and then formed his arms into magma. Luffy figured that since Wapol had wax armor created by Mr. 3, he could likely stand some hits of pure magma. Wapol began to grow nervous as he fired off shot after shot with no luck. He went to take another step back when he realized his feet were stuck. Looking down, he was frightened to learn that both his feet had been frozen to the ground. Wait, maybe we can work something out. You want the monster, he's yours. I'll let you leave the country with your friends, and we'll never bother each other again, Wapol said, trying to bargain with the pirate. No deal, Luffy said calmly as he launched himself at Wapol. Mag detonation. Luffy yelled as his palms connected with Wapol's torso, causing an explosion of magma to blow outward from the impact. Wapol screamed out in pain as he was launched into the wall of his own castle, causing it to crumble as he impacted. Wapol laid in the ruins of his wall as he felt the armor that he ingested crumble and melt off of him. It seemed Mr. Three's ability may have saved his life, but he was still in severe pain. 20 MDs, come quickly, I need your help, Wapol shouted out. Soon the doctors scrambled outside as they looked between their king and the man who had attacked him. What are you doing? Get over here now, Wapol yelled as he struggled to his feet. Intense burns covered his body, and he felt like some of his ribs had been broken. Whether it had been the impact of the pirate's attack or when he hit the wall, he wasn't sure. If you 20 are going to help anyone, then help Chopper over there get to Kira, Luffy shouted, looking at the doctors who began to sweat. They were pretty sure this man might be able to defeat Wapol, but if they were wrong, then Wapol would inevitably turn on them. Luffy raised an arm and formed an ice arm out of the barrier he had constructed around Chopper's cage. Reaching out, he grasped the cage door with the ice arm and pulled it off its hinges before destroying the barrier around Chopper and the one to Kira's lab. Help him now, Luffy repeated, giving the doctors a look that made their decision for them. Between the unknown pirate and the king, who seemed like he already had 1 foot beyond death's door, the decision on who to obey was easy. The doctors quickly ran to Chopper and began bandaging his most severe wounds before heading inside the castle. Wapol looked on as his doctors left him behind. Those bastards were supposed to be his personal doctors, and they betrayed him. Looking over to the pirate, Wapol wondered what he should do now. Luffy returned his attention to his enemy now that Chopper was being helped. The wax was destroyed now, so he began using his ice powers to harden his arms. Wapol decided it was time to get out of there, and began to run towards one of the ropeways. If he could outrun Luffy, then he could rejoin his men and leave the island. Unfortunately for Wapol, his large form was not nearly fast enough to escape, and Luffy quickly caught up to the man. He swung out with his leg and knocked the man to the ground. Wapol struggled to get up as he tried scrambling to his feet, but found a foot firmly planted in his back, pushing him back into the ground. Luffy was looking down at Wapol and found himself thinking back to his fight with Arlong. Both of them were actually very similar now that he thought about it. Both ruled places by force and had caused a lot of pain and misery for people he considered nakama. With Arlong, though, it had been a moment of intense anger that had driven him to kill Arlong. Right now he had the upper hand, and Luffy could make a similar choice. Could Luffy kill him, though? Wapol had nearly killed Chopper and had done so to many more over the years, most likely. If he didn't kill him, though, what should he do? If he let him go, Wapol would most likely leave the island only to return once again if he could. Luffy wouldn't want that to happen, but other than killing him, what his options were? Wapol was noble. This island couldn't imprison him without the world government coming down on them. For that same reason, the Marines wouldn't arrest him either if the townspeople asked for aid. Wapol, through his struggling, managed to free himself and continue running away. Luffy watched as Wapol moved farther away from him. If he just let him go like this, he might hurt someone on his way off the island. If he even left, that is, and didn't just go into hiding somewhere on the island. Wapol's devil fruit made him too powerful for anyone on this island to fight. Wapol might even be able to eat one of his nakama if it came to a fight between them. Luffy knew his crew wouldn't let Wapol hurt any of the villagers, so they would put themselves in harm's way to protect them. Luffy focused on Wapol again, a grim determination set into his face. Wapol, as he was running, noticed that the Straw Hat guy wasn't following him anymore. Maybe he had given up. He wasn't sure why he would, but Wapol wasn't going to give Luffy time to change his mind. Wapol took one last look behind him as he grew closer to the ropeway. He was surprised to see that Luffy was gone now. Turning back, he saw the man in front of him but didn't have time to react as the man struck forth with a red arm. Luffy had appeared in front of Wapol with his ice abilities and plunged his magma-covered arm through Wapol's chest. Wapol coughed blood onto Luffy as he collapsed onto his arm. Strength was rapidly leaving Wapol's body as the life drained out of him. Luffy looked down on Wapol as he pulled his arm out of his chest and returned his arm to normal. Wapol gave one more small cough as his body grew still. King Wapol was now dead. Luffy looked at his hand and saw some of Wapol's blood remained on it, and wiped it off in the snow. Luffy left behind the corpse and began walking towards the castle. Had he made the right choice? The idea of killing made him feel sick to his stomach, but he wasn't sure that he regretted it. As he got closer, he noticed the ice statues of the soldiers he had frozen earlier. Luffy used his ice powers to unfreeze them. While he had decided to kill Wapol, he didn't want to kill these men as well. The villagers could determine what they wanted to do with them. The soldiers released from their prison began to look around in confusion. Wapol is dead, Luffy said, causing all of them to look at him in shock. I won't fight you if you don't attack, so how about you guys just run away? The soldiers wasted no time as they dropped their weapons and began running towards the ropeway. The pirate had bested them before, so without their king forcing them, they had no reason to stay. Luffy watched them run, and when they ran far enough away, continued his way into the castle. Now he had to figure out a way to convince Chopper to join him again. He only hoped that whatever changes had taken place here would not change Chopper's desire to join them. Inside the castle, the 20 MDs had joined Kira in aiding Chopper. While his wounds were pretty serious, it was nothing that this group couldn't handle. Kira felt her heart break to see Chopper in the state he was. She wouldn't let it show, but to see him battered and bruised reminded her just how close she had come to losing Chopper. If that man hadn't shown up, she never would have seen Chopper alive again. Kira realized as she continued treating Chopper that she had never gotten the man's name. Just who was he? All Kira knew was that he had a sick nakama that he would be willing to climb a mountain in a blizzard and bring down the reign of an evil king just so she could be healed. When Kira was done with Chopper, she would have to go check in on her other patient as well. For now, though she was resting and had received her medication so she would be good for another couple hours yet, Luffy walked into the lab he had been in before and was surprised to see it empty save for Robin. They must have taken Chopper to another room to be treated, he realized. Luffy removed the remaining 2 ice barriers on the doors as he sat down next to Robin's bed. Luffy would just have to wait here for Kira to get back, though he was concerned about how his nakama in the village were faring. It was likely that Wapol would have sent his men to attack if he had known that the Straw Hats were coming. Luffy trusted his crew would be able to handle them though. Zoro and Alvida were likely strong enough on their own, and with everyone else backing them up they should all be fine. Once Kiriha was back, and he was sure everything was all right again, he would go check on the rest of his nakama just in case. "Captain," a groggy voice broke the silence. Luffy turned around and saw Robin sitting up in her bed. She still looked tired, but her feverish state seemed to have subsided. "Robin, how are you feeling?" Luffy asked as he stood up and walked to her bed. "Much better now, Captain." "Thank you," Robin said honestly. Looking up at the man standing over her, she found herself thinking on why Luffy would go through so much trouble for someone like her. After all, she had been an enemy not even a week ago, and then somehow Robin found herself wrapped up in this crew. Luffy had managed to convince her to join despite all her reservations. Then when Robin found herself needing his help, Luffy hadn't hesitated to do so. Any other crew would have left her and continued on without looking back. Crocodile needed her to translate the poneglyph, so he wouldn't have let Robin die as long as she was still useful to him. Luffy was right when he had said that Crocodile would be the kind to dispose of her when she was no longer helpful though. "So Luffy, where did you run off to while I was out?" Robin asked. "The doctor wouldn't let me ask any questions and insisted I get some rest. I was saving Kiriha's assistant. I'm hoping that he becomes one of our newest nakama, but I haven't had much of a chance to talk to him yet," Luffy said, explaining. Robin sensed there was something that Luffy wasn't talking about. Luffy usually had a bubbly personality, but right now he was somber and quiet. The fact that his shirt was covered in blood that didn't seem to be his made her wonder if it was connected to his current mood. "What's wrong, Luffy?" Robin decided to ask. Luffy looked at her, surprised that she seemed to have sensed his sour mood. "Well, the guy who took over this kingdom hurt the doctor's assistant pretty bad. I beat him pretty easily, but..." Luffy trailed off as he thought about what happened next. "What is it?" Robin asked, concerned. "I killed him. Wapol was running away from me, and I was wondering what I should do." Luffy began to explain. "I figured that if I let him go, he would only go on to hurt and maybe even kill more people. However, now I am wondering if I did the right thing," Luffy admitted. Robin could see the turmoil on her captain's face and was surprised to see genuine remorse. Most pirates killed people with little thought whether they deserved it or not. She had killed quite a few people in her years since leaving Ohara as a child. None that she would say were innocent, but to say they all deserved to die would be a stretch. "Luffy, I don't know much beyond what you have told me about this Wapol man, but I do know a bit about you by now. You don't strike me as a man who kills unless they truly think it is their only choice," Robin said, looking at Luffy. Luffy looked up at her, curious to hear Robin's reasoning. "If you made a choice to kill him, then I know it's not something that came easily to you. Luffy, you could have let him go, but you were right to think that he would likely go on to hurt more people if you did so," Robin said. "If he was king of this island, then it isn't likely that he would accept being thrown out if he could help it. Men who are accustomed to power aren't very willing to relinquish it if they can help it. Wapol could have just hidden away and returned once we were gone." Luffy nodded at that. It was something he had thought was possible. It is impossible to say for sure what this man would have done. Maybe he would take his defeat as a sign and try his best to make amends. What is more likely in my mind is that he would continue doing as he had, hurting and killing people to maintain his power. "If I were in your shoes, I would not hesitate in killing him," Robin said finally. Luffy nodded again. While it wasn't something he would welcome, maybe it was for the best. Wapol was a terrible man who had a lot to answer for, much as Arlong had. Then he had killed them both. What did that mean for the future though? There were a couple that he knew he wouldn't have a problem killing, Sakazuki and Blackbeard being the two he had in mind. It wasn't time to dwell on such things. If it came down to it, Luffy decided he would kill those who might be a danger to innocent people and his crew. It wasn't something he liked to think about though. Right now Luffy just had to worry about getting Chopper to join his crew and Robin getting better. Then they could leave this island behind and move on to Alabasta. "Thanks, Robin. I appreciate your support," Luffy said, smiling at her. Robin nodded as she laid her head back down on her pillow. "Anytime, Captain." But for now I think I should get some more rest before Kira comes back and sees me up, Robin said with a smile as she closed her eyes. Luffy laughed a little at that. He knew firsthand how scary that woman could be. If I'm not here when you wake up, I promise I will be back soon. Get some rest now. Robin nodded a little as she slowly drifted off to sleep. Luffy watched her for a little bit before standing up and looking around the room. Before he left Robin's side, he noticed a hair covering her face, covering her mouth. Luffy brushed it off her face and tucked it behind her ear. Suddenly he began to feel a warm feeling in his gut as he held the side of her face. He quickly pulled away and wondered where that had come from. Luffy took a step away as he thought about that weird feeling before shaking his head of those thoughts. Right now he had more important things to worry about. So far Kira had not returned, so maybe he should go look for her before he went to check on his crew. Taking one last look at Robin, Luffy left the room in search of his future doctor and Nakama. Robin looked out from the corner of her eye as she watched Luffy walk away. Touching the side of her face, she wondered just what that had all been about before heading back to sleep. Eventually, in his search of the castle, Luffy found Kira wheeling Chopper back towards where Robin was. He noticed that there was a wrapping around his leg where his wound used to be. "How are you doing, Chopper?" Luffy asked. Chopper looked up at the man who had saved him. I am doing all right. Thanks for asking," he replied nervously. He still wasn't quite used to talking to people outside his mentor. "That's good to hear," Luffy said, smiling at him. "I was really worried when I saw you locked up, but I am glad you are doing better now." "Yes, thanks to you we were able to treat Chopper and fix his wounds before they got any worse. So thank you for not only saving my life but Chopper's as well." The three continued their way back towards Robin in the lab. Chopper looked at the pirate curiously. This was the first time he had ever met a real pirate, and he had saved his life. It was kind of cool, he thought, to see a real one in action. "You saved the doctor too?" Chopper asked the man. "Yup, my friend needed a doctor. So when I learned that the best doctor on the island was in trouble up here, I decided to help. I was glad to see that both of you were still alive. I was worried." Luffy let the implication trail. He didn't like just how close Chopper might have come to dying. "Well, anyway, I'm glad you are all right. Wapol won't be hurting the two of you anymore," Luffy said finally. "Speaking of Wapol, where is he now?" Kiriha asked. "Well, he is dead now. I killed him during the fight," Luffy said. Kiriha nodded at that. If there were anyone that deserved what they got, it would be Wapol. At least he would no longer be bothering this island. "Thank you, Luffy. Truly this island owes you quite a debt. Wapol was a terrible king, and the people here have suffered greatly ever since he took control," Kiriha said. Chopper nodded at that, thinking about how Wapol had once tricked Hiruluk into thinking the island was in mortal danger. That event had ended in Hiruluk's death, killing the man that Chopper had come to see as a father. "It's no problem. I was glad to help everyone here out, especially since you helped my Nakama as well. Speaking of Nakama, Chopper, I hear that you are a doctor yourself. Have you ever thought about becoming a pirate?" Luffy asked his small Nakama. Chopper's eyes widened as he thought about the question. Well, I have thought about it before. I've always wanted to see a real pirate." Why do you ask?" Chopper replied nervously. "I need a doctor on my crew," Luffy exclaimed, laughing. "We're Nakama now, right? So what do you say, want to join my crew?" Chopper jaw dropped as he looked up at the man. "Why you want me to be on your crew? Why?" "Well, you seem really cool. Plus we need a doctor, so if you want to be a pirate, it would be a perfect fit for you," Luffy explained, still smiling at Chopper. "I don't know," Chopper said, thinking about it. "I am not even human, so why would you want someone like me on your crew? Why would I care about that? You are cool, and you are my Nakama. That's all that should matter," Luffy said. "You think I'm cool?" Chopper said, surprised. He had been amazed to see what he had of Luffy's fight earlier, and to think that this strong pirate thought he was cool as well. Kiriha interrupted, saying, "Chopper needs his rest, so how about you discuss this later after I have had a talk with you?" Kiriha said as she eyed Luffy suspiciously. Kiriha was grateful for Luffy's assistance, but she wasn't about to let someone unknown to her take away her assistant, unless she thought she could trust him, and Chopper really wanted to, then maybe she could allow it. Luffy nodded, and they soon found themselves entering the lab where Robin was resting. Kiriha put Chopper in the other bed in the room and got back to her work. "All right, I want to check in on everybody in town. Make sure everyone is all right. You think about what I've asked and get some rest, Chopper?" Luffy said, heading out the room. Chopper just nodded as he watched the pirate leave. Just what would it be like to be a pirate in that man's crew, he wondered. The Straw Hats had just finished off the remainder of the soldiers when Chess and Kirimurimo made their move with Mr. Five close behind. Chess began firing arrows at the Straw Hats left and right, while Kirimurimo he threw his sticky hairballs everywhere he could. Vivi was unfortunately caught by a few of the hairballs, although she was confused as to their purpose. This momentary pause was all Chess needed as he launched a flurry of flaming arrows at the girl. Miss Goldenweek grimaced. Unfortunately, they had neglected to mention they needed the princess alive. It was too late now, however. If the princess died, there was nothing she could do about it. Luckily, Zoro saw the attack coming and intercepted the arrows, deflecting them through the air as they landed harmlessly in the snow. Zoro decided he had enough of the hairball tosser and ran straight at him, intending to cut him down. Zoro, duck! Zoro heard as he immediately ducked low to the ground as a ball flew over his head and hit Kiramurimo dead on, exploding in a ball of fire. Unfortunately for Kiramurimo, his greatest strength was also his weakness. Usopp, having noticed Chess's strategy of lighting the hairballs on fire, decided that he would use their own tactics against them. After all, the source was likely just as flammable, and that had turned out to be true. Nice shot, Usopp. Zoro grinned as he looked back at his nakama. Usopp gave him a thumbs up as he surveyed the battleground. He noticed the girl had gone missing during the battle. He wondered where she had gone off to. Did she run away after realizing they were outmatched? Mr. 5, seeing his ally get taken down, began to fire his nose cannons at the Straw Hats. Due to Miss Goldenweek's paint, he was currently seething with rage. Not only had these Straw Hats shown him up once before, but now his life was on the line as well. If he couldn't bring them down, then he would be lucky if he lived to see the sunset. Mr. 0 didn't accept failure, and Mr. 3 wouldn't hesitate to kill him if he was ordered to do so. Alvida, not knowing that his projectiles were nose pickings, let them slide off her, exploding harmlessly behind her. She continued running at the man as he dug into his nose for more. Alvida, suddenly realizing what he had been tossing at her, flew into her own rage. How dare he flick boogers at a beautiful woman such as I? She screamed inwardly, seeing as his target was getting close. He took a swing with his hand, intending to blow it up on contact, but missed as she dodged. Ducking under his fist, Alvida swung her giant mace into his chest, knocking all the wind out of his lungs. As Mr. 5 stumbled to catch his breath, Vivi flew in behind him with her peacock slashers and cut deeply into his legs, dropping him to the ground. Unable to walk and blinded by pain and rage from Miss Goldenweek's paint, Mr. 5 withdrew his gun and pointed it at Vivi's face. This was his chance. He knew he wasn't going to make it out alive, but he would be damned if that princess bitch did. A shadow crossed his face, and he realized too late that he would never get that shot off. Alvida had struck fast when she realized what he was aiming at and brought her mace down as hard as she could, swing on top of his skull. The sickening crunch and splatter of brain, blood, and bone were enough to show her Mr. 5 wouldn't be harming anyone. Vivi was a little disturbed by the violence, but knew Alvida had done what she had to save her life. "Thank you, Alvida. I owe you one," Vivi said, smiling at the taller woman. Alvida brushed it off and said, "Don't worry about it, princess, just earning my keep," she said with a smile of her own. Now Wapol was down to only one man. Chess was currently trying his best to fend off Zoro with his dual axes, but was having no luck. Each time Chess blocked one blade, 2 cuts were made somewhere else on his body. For some reason, though, despite all the pain, his body refused to give up. Was this the power that Miss Goldenweek had put on him? At the rate he was going, he would kill himself just trying to fight. But something in him wouldn't let him give up, despite how much his instincts screamed for him to do. Zoro was surprised at Chess. He was an amateur at melee combat. But if he could say anything, the man could certainly take a hit. "Usopp," he yelled, and the sniper got the message as he fired off a lead star, hitting the injured man on the forehead, knocking him out cold. Zoro didn't feel the man was worth cutting down, seeing the fear on his face. It just felt like kicking a man while he was down at this point, so he had Usopp knock him out instead. Overall, this fight had been pretty disappointing. When would he meet some real swordsmen? Hopefully, the next island would prove more challenging. Luckily for both Chess and Kiramurimo, both their painted symbols had been broken in some fashion. If they hadn't, their hearts would have beaten madly until they gave out, conscious or not. After the fight, the Straw Hats look around the battlefield. The 3 main fighters had been taken down as well as their troop, but of the young girl, there was no trace. It seemed she had retreated when things had started to go awry. Now, as long as no one else came to attack them, all the Straw Hats had to do was wait for Luffy to come back. Hopefully, he would be coming back with good news for Robin's sake. Eventually, Luffy found himself walking through a field of unconscious men and one dead Mr. 5. It seemed he had been right to suspect that Wapol's men would attack the town. He only hoped that his crew had made it out relatively unscathed. Walking into town, he was surprised to see how upbeat the people seemed to be. Most were walking around with big smiles on their faces, despite the fact most of the village had been leveled. Soon enough, he found his crew, who seemed to be relaxing after the fight with some of the villagers. "Luffy," some of his crew yelled as they noticed his arrival. "Is Robin all right?" Kaya asked her captain. Luffy smiled as he gave them a thumbs up. "I found Kira and her assistant Chopper. They are helping Robin as we speak, although I wanted to make sure everyone else was all right down here." Gesturing to the battlefield at the other end of town, he asked, "Everyone all right? It seemed you guys are in good spirits though, so I trust it all went well." His crew told him about the fight, and he was glad to learn no one had been injured, although Alvida still grumbled about having been struck by boogers. Luffy laughed at his crew's retelling. "Well, I knew you guys could handle yourselves. I'm glad to hear everything's all right though. I ended up fighting Mr. 3 and Wapol up there, so we should have no trouble from here on out." Some of the villagers stared at him in shock at that declaration. Wapol, you defeated him. Some asked, excitement showing in their voices and faces. Yeah, Wapol is dead now. He won't be bothering you anymore, Luffy said. At this, the villagers gave a loud cheer as the news spread throughout the town. King Wapol was no more. However, as most of the villagers began celebrating at the excellent news, some had worries they hoped the newcomers could address. By any chance, do you know what happened to Dolphin? One of the other villages sent word that he had gone to fight Wapol yesterday, but we haven't heard anything since. Luffy scratched his head. He hadn't run into him, but he hadn't searched the whole prison, so hopefully he was still alive. I have to head back up the mountain anyway, so I will search there. If I find him or any news on his condition, I will be sure to pass it on. Thank you, kind sir. The old man who he had talked to when he first arrived said, truly we could never repay you for the kindness you have already bestowed on us, let alone what you are doing for us now, he said with tears in his eyes. Don't worry about it, old man. We help those in need, Luffy said, smiling as he looked at Vivi. Vivi smiled at this. It seemed she was truly blessed to have found a pirate as kind as Luffy was. Most pirates would have likely turned her in for a payout and never looked back. But Luffy and his crew were indeed different. On the other side of the village, Sanji was making his way through town with a bag of food over his shoulder. He was surprised to see the town celebrating considering the destruction that seemed to be everywhere. Soon though, he came across his nakama who were currently talking under one of the larger makeshift tents. Hey, what did I miss? We having a celebration? Sanji asked, gesturing at the excited villagers. Yes, sir. These kind souls just saved this island from the tyrannical rule of King Wapol, one of the villagers answered. Hut, Sanji said as he thought to himself, that's the last time I volunteered to watch the ship, especially since he hadn't had any alone time with Nichiko as he had hoped. Well, there is enough food for everyone, so eat up. I made plenty, so don't be shy, Sanji said, setting the bag down on the ground. Luffy grabbed a piece of meat and said his goodbyes. I've got to make sure Robin is all right, so I will be back later. Don't be surprised though if we have a new nakama when I get back though, Luffy said, laughing as he set off down the road. Another nakama. Most of the crew thought, if Luffy kept inviting people at the current rate, their ship was going to run out of beds by next month, if not sooner. At Wapol's old castle, though a specific Baroque Works member had just stumbled upon the opportunity of a lifetime, Mr. 3 was currently sneaking his way through the castle. He knew he had to get out of there as fast as possible, but he wouldn't be able to do that without calling into Mr. 0, which unfortunately meant reporting his failure, which surely wouldn't go over well. But he had no choice. Without a log post provided by his boss, he wouldn't make it far. On his way, however, he noticed a partial wall of ice that had a hole in it. Curious, he carefully snuck up to the entrance and peeked his way in. If that straw hat bastard caught him now, he would be done for, by Mr. 0's order or not. He was almost giddy when he saw who was currently laying feverish in one of the beds. Miss All Sunday. If he could kill her, Mr. 0 would be sure to reward him for killing Baroque Works' highest-ranked trader. He usually wouldn't dare attack her out in the open, but considering she was asleep and sick, he would have no better opportunity than now. Mr. 3 looked further into the room and saw an old woman currently working on something on the other side of the room. And then there was that reindeer creature who was resting in his own bed close by as well. This would have to be done quickly. He began creating wax and slowly worked its way over to the doctor and the creature. Before they knew what was wrong, he gagged and bound them with his wax. Neither could move or make a sound as he made his way into the room. Mr. 3 smiled darkly. His plan was working. He withdrew a knife from his belt and made his way to his former superior's bed. He almost wished he could make a living sculpture out of her, but it would be foolish to think it would even be possible with a woman of her strength, sick or not. He brought the blade down intending to pierce her heart, but was surprised when arms held him fast. Looking down, he was terrified to see arms growing out of his ribs holding his wrists still. They slowly twisted his arms until the knife was now pointed directly at his own throat. He looked down and saw the eyes of Miss All Sunday looking directly into his own. Despite how sick she looked, those eyes foretold his own death, and he began to sweat. Listen carefully, Galdino. I am going to give you only one chance to live here, and that is only if you do exactly as I say. Do you understand me? Robin asked, although it carried the authority of a demand, one he couldn't refuse. Galdino nodded carefully to not cut himself on the blade held against his throat. Robin then said, release those two immediately. Galdino quickly worked his powers and the wax melted off of the two, releasing his prisoners. Chopper was now awake and staring at the man as Kureha got to her feet. Good. Now we are going to wait for my new captain to get back. You are going to sit in that chair over there and not move a muscle. You know what will happen if you disobey, Robin said, looking at the cowering man above her. Galdino nodded once again as he made his way over to the chair and sat down. I'm dead, he thought to himself, terrified of the situation he was now in. He was sure that the straw hat would offer no mercy to him now. He swallowed heavily, feeling the blade graze his throat as a trickle of blood made its way down his neck. No, he was sure to not make it out of this alive. This was the scene Luffy eventually walked in on. Robin staring a crying Galdino down as she held a knife to his throat from across the room. Chopper was currently laying in bed observing the two. Kureha was taking a long swig from a bottle while continuing her work. Robin, noticing his entrance, smiled at him. "Hello, Captain. Guess who I found hovering over my bed with a knife?" Robin asked, her tone more cheerful than it should be. Luffy leveled his gaze at Galdino, who began crying even harder. Please, I was just following orders. If I didn't, Mr. Zero would have killed me for sure." Luffy nodded to himself at that. Crocodile definitely would have killed him since that was what he had done before. But as far as Luffy was concerned, he had already paid his debt by not harming him further earlier. "Captain, I do have an idea as to what to do with him if you are open to suggestions," Robin asked, and seeing Luffy's nod continued with her idea. "Mr. 3 is going to have to make a report soon to Crocodile if he is not already late to do so. I say let him make that report and tell Crocodile we are all dead. Crocodile should send him an eternal log post to Alabasta provided he doesn't have another mission for him outside of the country," Robin said, looking at her captain. Galdino was freaking out internally. So his mysterious boss was Crocodile, one of the 7 warlords of the sea. If he ever figured out that Galdino knew his true identity, he was sure to be killed now. Crocodile doesn't like having too many of his high-ranking members gone for too long, especially with his plan being this close to fruition. We can then use the log pose as well as the element of surprise we will gain from having him think we are dead. However, I wouldn't count on that lasting. Crocodile isn't an idiot, and he would be a fool to not at least suspect some of us may yet live," Robin said, finished laying out her plan to Luffy. Galdino spoke up. "My exact orders were to apprehend Vivi alive, so if I tell him I killed you and captured her, he will most certainly send an eternal log pose." Luffy thought about it and nodded. "That seems like a good plan. Even if he doesn't completely fall for our death, we will still have a way to Alabasta. Will you do what we ask?" Luffy asked, and Galdino nodded, quickly scraping himself with the knife again. "All right." Robin let him go. "I'll take him from here. You just get some rest, all right?" Luffy said, looking back at Robin. Robin nodded and began to settle back into the bed. "Yes, Captain. Let me know if you need any help taking care of him," she said as she closed her eyes and began to rest. Luffy gestured to Galdino and said, "Come on. You've got a call to make." Galdino got up and followed Luffy out the door before leading him to the room Wapol had given him. Within the room was a small transponder snail that contained a direct line to Mr. Zero. "Get on with it then and make it convincing. If you don't," Luffy let the implication hang. Galdino nodded fervently and made his way to the transponder snail. Picking it up, he heard the line ring. He almost hoped Mr. Zero wouldn't answer, but he knew he was waiting on his report. It was not to be, though, as Mr. Zero responded almost immediately. "Mr. 3, you better have good news for me." "Yes, sir, I do. I was calling to inform you that the Straw Hats have been dealt with, and Vivi is currently our prisoner," Galdino said to his boss. "Good. And what of Miss All Sunday? Any news on her?" "Yes, it seems she had joined the Straw Hats, and she was killed with the rest of them," Galdino informed his boss. "Really?" Crocodile thought on that. It was hard to believe that Mr. 3 would have a chance against her unless he was very fortunate. "How did you manage to bring her down?" Well, I actually had a stroke of good luck with that. You see, Miss All Sunday seems to have been bedridden with a severe fever. She wasn't even aware of me until I plunged the knife into her heart," Galdino said, hoping Mr. Zero did not pick up on his stutter. Crocodile thought about that before beginning to chuckle darkly. "Serves that traitorous bitch right. Good work then, Mr. 3. With Miss All Sunday's defection, it is likely the ranks of the organization will face some title changes soon. I think there may be a promotion in this for you," Crocodile said to his subordinate. Galdino was about to respond when Mr. Zero spoke again. "Provided you succeed in bringing the princess straight here, alive and unharmed. If you can't manage that, you had better hope I never see you again. Is that clear, Mr. 3? Crocodile said, smiling evilly. Galdino began to sweat a little as he said, "Of course, sir. I will bring her straight to Alabasta. I will just need an eternal log pose, and we will set sail immediately, sir." "Good. The unluckies are already on their way to you with the pose. Don't disappoint me," Crocodile said as he hung up the phone. He tapped his finger on his desk as he thought about the situation. He had found himself doubting Mr. 3's abilities against both a pirate crew and Robin, but he supposed her sickness had been lucky for them. That and Mr. 3's ability to manipulate people. Maybe the combined strength of Baroque Works and the Drum Kingdom had been too much for them. Crocodile couldn't help but feel that something was not quite right. However, Luffy had let Galdino pack up his belongings, and he was now standing with him on one of the mountain's ropeways down to one of the other villages of the island. Earlier, Luffy had hidden when the unluckies came and dropped off the eternal log pose. It seemed they didn't suspect anything as they left quickly, most likely to do more of their boss bidding. Galdino had handed over the log pose to Luffy with no resistance. "I suggest you stay far away from your boss if you want to live. More importantly, though, don't make me regret letting you go, understand?" If we ever cross paths again and you find yourself standing against us, I don't think I'll be able to keep Miss All Sunday from killing you, understand? Luffy said, looking at Galdino seriously. Galdino nodded and said, of course, I wouldn't dream of standing against the two of you ever again, said fearfully. Now he just had to make sure that he never crossed paths with either the Straw Hats or Crocodile ever again. He wouldn't live through the experience of either, that he was sure of. The lift began its descent down the mountain, and Luffy turned and walked back towards the castle. Now that all was said and done, he would have to find Dalton if he was still alive. He hoped he was. After all, he was a good man and had saved Chopper's life once before. Luffy began his search in the dungeon, looking at each cell as he walked further and further into the prison. Soon enough he found an occupied cell which contained an injured Dalton. Luckily, though, he was conscious at least. Who are you? Come to give me my last meal, have you? Dalton said with labored breath. He may have been injured, but if he was going to die today, he was going out with dignity at least. Dalton, is that you? Some of the villagers asked me to find you, Luffy said as he approached the bars. The villagers? They asked you to rescue me, Dalton said, surprised. His first thought was that this man was one of the strangers Wapol had brought back to the island. Yup. After the villagers learned that Wapol had been defeated, they were concerned where you had wound up, Luffy said as he began destroying the lock with his magma powers. Wapol has been defeated. Is that truly so? Dalton said, attempting to sit up through the intense pain. Careful, Luffy said, noticing the man's discomfort. How about I take you to the doctor, and we can talk all about it on the way? Dalton nodded at that and let the man help him stand. With Luffy supporting his weight, the two began to leave the cell and headed to Kira. On the way, Luffy informed Dalton of what had happened throughout the last day. Dalton had been surprised to learn that the man who was helping him now had killed Wapol and saved his country. Not only that, but they had also defeated Chess, Kirimarimo, and his new allies as well. Eventually, they made it to the infirmary and Luffy helped him into one of the beds in the adjacent room. Kira and the other doctors began to attend his wounds. As they did so, Luffy went and visited Robin. Robin was awake again and patted the bed, telling him to sit. Luffy sat on the end of her bed and told her what had happened with Galdino as he took out the log pose. Well, I'm not sure I would have let him live, Captain. I agree that he will likely not move against us. He would be a fool to go to Crocodile now, and an even bigger one to attack us again, I suppose, Robin said, thinking about the man. Luffy didn't really say anything to that. Galdino had helped him out more than once in the past, and considering he had tried to help him save Ace, well, it was hard to be against the man even if that hadn't happened this time around. However, now that brings us to our next adventure. Alabasta. So you think you are really strong enough to take down Crocodile then? Do you even know how strong he is? He wasn't made one of the 7 warlords by accident, Robin asked, looking at Luffy carefully. She wasn't regretting her decision to join the man considering how hard he had fought to save her life. But Robin also wasn't willing to let the man go straight to his death fighting an enemy that might be too powerful for him. Luffy smiled at her and said, "Don't worry about it, Robin. I won't underestimate him. If anything, Crocodile won't be prepared to fight me." He lifted his right arm and used armament haki to demonstrate. Robin watched as his arm turned shiny and black and was curious as to what that meant. That was something she had never seen before. "You were probably wondering if I could defeat someone with a Loja-type devil fruit like Crocodile's, right? Well, with this," Luffy said as he nodded towards his hand, "I can hit him just like anyone else. This can neutralize the effect Lojas have to nullify damage." "Really?" Robin said in wonder as she reached out to touch his hand. It was strange, she thought, to stroke its surface. It didn't feel like skin any longer but felt solid and smooth like marble, and almost cold to the touch. Maybe the cold was just his devil fruit power at work though. Luffy drew his hand away as he felt a strange warmth in his chest from the contact. His face felt a little warm too as he noticed Robin's reaction to his sudden withdrawal. "Sorry, Captain. I didn't mean to invade your personal space. I was just surprised at your display of power," Robin said, noticing his flushed face. She wondered if her captain might have a bit of a crush on her considering his reaction and what had happened earlier. That was something to think about. "No, don't worry about it. I was just surprised is all," Luffy said a little nervously. What had that been, he wondered. These new feelings were strange, and he wished he understood them better. It seemed like it was every other day he was discovering some weird feeling around some of his nakama. Luffy stopped using haki as his arm returned to normal. "So yeah, I'm not going into a fight with Crocodile unprepared. I know it won't be easy, but between the two of us he doesn't stand a chance," Luffy said, smiling at Robin again. Robin smiled back with a laugh of her own. "All right, Captain. Well, I think I am feeling well enough now to return to the ship. Maybe we can get some medicine from our doctor friend." Robin was interrupted, however, as Kiriha returned with a scowl on her face. "Like hell, you were getting out of bed. You were on death's door earlier today, and you need several more days to rest with medication, or you could die yet," Kiriha said, getting back to her medicines. "Speaking of medication, you need some more now." She filled a cup with some strange-looking liquid as she passed it on to Robin. Robin, grimacing at the foul-tasting medicine, quickly downed it in one go and coughed at the taste. Kiriha laughed, watching the reaction. Good girl, there's no such thing as a tasty and effective medicine. Now you get some rest. Robin nodded and looked to her captain. Luffy nodded at her unasked question. Do as she says, Robin. If she says, you need more rest, then that's what you'll get, Luffy said, smiling as he stood. Robin went to give Luffy back his hat but was stopped by the man. Give it back to me when you're back on the ship, all right? Luffy said to her. Robin nodded again and curled up in bed again, preparing to nap again. Kiriha looked at Luffy with interest. I think it's time the two of us talk, Kiriha said as she walked out the door to the central room of the castle. Luffy followed after her and shut the door behind him. Right now he was feeling a little nervous, knowing that Chopper's decision to come with might ride on this one conversation. So Luffy, I want to hear about this group of yours. If you want Chopper to travel with you, I think I should know just what kind of people he would be joining, Kiriha said, looking at Luffy. Well, we are pirates, as you have already heard. Right now we are traveling with the Princess of Alabasta, whose country is currently in danger because of a revolution that will happen soon. We offered to help her save her country, and while we were on our way there, Robin got sick, as you know, Luffy began to explain. Really? You are on your way to save a country? Are you sure you're pirates? Kiriha asked, surprised. Luffy laughed at that. We're pirates, but we aren't your typical pirates. We are Nakama who all sail together so that one day we can all achieve our dreams. On the way, we'll help those we can, like you guys and the princess. Kiriha thought about that for a moment. Luffy and his crew had done more than enough to help her own country, so she knew that last part was at least genuine. If you are all following your dreams, what is yours? Kiriha asked. Luffy grinned at that. I am going to become king of the pirates. Kiriha looked at him and smiled. That's so. Well, then that is quite a goal. You know, Chopper has led a hard life. Most humans look at him like he is a monster. There are only 2 people he has ever gotten close to in his life, and I am the only one still alive. Kiriha gave Luffy a hard look before saying, you seem to not mind that he isn't human, but what about your crew? Can you say the same for them? Luffy smiled as he looked back at her. My crew is filled with weirdos and people others might consider monsters. Chopper will fit right in with the rest of us. Kiriha smirked at that. From the little she knew of this man, she figured what he said was the truth. The man in front of her was undoubtedly a weirdo, at least. So why then do you want to bring Chopper along? She asked. Well, he seems like a good guy. And we need a doctor. Right now we have someone on board who is looking to become a doctor herself, so having Chopper join us means she could have a mentor. Luffy said. Do you think Chopper has what it takes to have an apprentice? Luffy asked, although he knew that Chopper was more than capable. Kiriha thought about that for a minute. She knew Chopper's skills had advanced to the point that he could teach anyone, but it meant losing her own apprentice if he were to leave. Kiriha also knew about Chopper's obsession with pirates, so with a little push, she knew Chopper would likely be willing to join the Straw Hats. He has the skill, but I want to talk to Chopper before you ask him again, Kiriha said finally. You wait out here while I have a talk with Chopper. Kiriha said this as she walked away from him and went back inside. Luffy nodded as he leaned against the balcony railing and looked out over the castle. He hoped that this meant Chopper was still willing to sail with him. He wasn't sure what he would do if Chopper refused. Could he really leave behind a Nakama since he had no memories of sailing with the Straw Hats? Inside, Kiriha looked at Chopper, who was laying in bed reading up on the sickness Robin had contracted. It wasn't something he had seen before, and after having a talk with Kiriha had decided to look into it on his own. Chopper, I thought I told you to get some rest, Kiriha said, although she was pretending to be more annoyed than she actually was. Sorry, Doctorine, Chopper said abashedly as he shut the book. Kiriha smiled at him before sitting on the edge of his bed, wondering what she should say. Chopper, what do you think of the pirate that saved us? Kiriha asked. Luffy, well, he seems like he is a really cool pirate. Plus he doesn't seem to mind that I am not human like a lot of people on this island do, Chopper said nervously. Plus he says he wants me to join his crew and sail the sea. Luke always said my destiny lied out there somewhere on the ocean, so maybe this crew could be the one I find it with, Chopper said quietly. Do you think they would accept someone like me? Chopper asked, looking up at his mentor. Kiriha smiled. Chopper, they would be fools to not accept someone like you. From what that man says, though, I don't think you have to worry about that. Then she looked at Chopper as she tried her best to hold back any tears that might come through. Is sailing with Luffy and his Nakama something that you really want to do? Chopper didn't meet her gaze at first as he thought about it. Sailing the seas with Nakama was something that had always seemed like an impossible dream, one that no matter how much he wished for, it would never actually come true. He then looked towards Kiriha. I think I do. Do you think it's possible for me to become a pirate, to sail with humans out on the sea? Kiriha put her hand on his head as she stroked his fur. You can achieve whatever you set your mind to, Chopper. You have been my assistant for many years now, but now it's time for you to make your own way in this world. As she said this, a few tears trickled down her face as she smiled down on Chopper. Chopper had tears of his own flowing now as he looked back towards his mentor. Kureha stood up as she brushed away her tears. It's time for you to rest now, Chopper. You are going to need your strength if you are going to sail the open sea. Chopper nodded at her as he wiped away his own tears. Yes, Doctorine, he said as he laid back down in his bed. Kureha was glad to hear that he would be leaving the island and traveling with Nakama, but it hurt to think of her assistant going. It was then that she got the idea for a proper send-off for Chopper. Kureha walked back outside and towards Luffy. Say, Brat, when you were fighting Wapol, did you happen to see a key on him? Perhaps he dropped it in the fight. Kureha asked, hoping that he knew what she was talking about. No, sorry, I didn't get it from him. Is it to that large door down below? Luffy asked. He had remembered about how she had set up the cannons to fire that special pink stuff that seemed to mean so much to Chopper. I could break it down for you though if you want, Luffy said. It shouldn't be all that hard, it was only made out of stone after all. Really, I would consider your debt paid if you did, but make sure you don't damage anything inside. Don't want you blowing up the castle along with the door, Kureha said, looking at him sternly. Luffy laughed. I can do that, no problem. Though he wondered about that debt part. Hadn't he saved her and Chopper's life in return for treating Robin? Oh well, as long as he wouldn't owe her anything else, he should be fine. After all, if she started asking for money, Nami was going to be pissed at him. Luffy went downstairs and stood in front of the massive door. He used his Icy-Mag fist to increase the size of his arm as he smashed it into the stone. Sure enough, it crumbled easily as he pulled some of the debris away from the entrance. Looking inside, he was surprised to see just how many weapons had been stockpiled here. He wondered what would have happened if Wapol had gotten a hold of this the last time around. Could he have possibly won? Well, no matter now. Wapol had already lost again, so there was no point wondering about it now. As he walked outside the armory, he was surprised to see a group of people heading inside the castle. It's you, that straw hat fellow that defeated Wapol, right? Some of the people asked. Oh hey, you guys are from the village, right? Everything okay down there? Luffy asked, wondering what brought them here. Well, we were concerned about Dalton. We were hoping that you had found him. We locked up most of Wapol's old soldiers as well as Chess and Kirimurimo. Buried that other guy too. One of the villagers answered him. Oh yeah, don't worry about Dalton. He was a little roughed up, but Kureha and the other doctors are taking care of him now. Kureha might let you see him if you ask nicely, Luffy said, gesturing for them to follow him. That's good to hear. Thank you so much for your help, Straw Hat, the villagers said as they followed Luffy to the infirmary. Up in the infirmary, Kureha was back to working on medicine as she turned to look at the newcomers. Luffy gestured to the villagers as he said, these guys were hoping to see Dalton if that's all right. Kureha let out a sigh as she looked at the group. Fine, but in return, you are going to owe me a favor. I'll let you know later what I need you to do for me. The villagers looked amongst themselves and could agree to her terms. All right, thank you, Doctor, they said as they walked to Dalton's room. Looking around, Luffy realized Chopper was no longer resting and seemed to be missing. Do you know where Chopper went? Luffy asked Kureha. Yeah, the kid's back in his room. If you take a right from here, you will eventually find his room on your right side, Kureha said as she went back to her work. Luffy thanked her and headed out to find Chopper. It was time to see what his answer was. Smiling to himself, he knew that soon he would have his doctor back on his crew. Not only that, but then Chopper could tutor his new Nakama Kaya to become a doctor as well. Luffy was sitting in front of Chopper looking at him intently. Well, have you decided? Luffy asked seriously. Decided? Chopper asked as he was sitting in his room. He had been looking over all his belongings as he thought about what Luffy had asked him earlier. Whether or not you want to join my crew. Remember, we are Nakama now and I want you to join the Straw Hat Pirates, Luffy said, smiling. Chopper stared at him. It was actually happening. Luffy really wanted to be his Nakama, and for him to become a pirate. You really want someone like me on your crew? I'm not like the rest of you humans. Do you think your crew would accept someone like me? Chopper asked nervously. Just because Luffy seemed to accept him didn't mean the others would. It doesn't matter who or what you are. All that matters is that we are Nakama, and whether or not you want to become a pirate, Luffy said, laughing. So what do you say, become a pirate and join my crew? We can go on all sorts of adventures together. Chopper's eyes began to water. Could he really do it? Become a pirate? With humans? Do you really mean it? Chopper stammered through his tears. Of course, we're Nakama now and that's never going to change, Luffy said, holding his hand out. Chopper tentatively reached out a hoof and grasped his hand as the two Nakama shook hands. Congratulations, Chopper, you're now a member of the Straw Hat Pirates. I can't wait for everyone else to meet you, Luffy said, smiling again. And Chopper matched his grin as he continued to cry tears of joy. Thank you, Luffy, for everything, Chopper said gratefully. No need to thank me. Helping Nakama is just something I do, Luffy said as he stood up. Listen, I need to talk to Kureha and see if I can convince her to let Robin go. Do you think Robin would be alright if she left, with you looking after her? Chopper thought carefully about that. Well, she should be fine as long as she keeps taking medicine at regular intervals and stays in bed. I can't walk without these crutches though, Chopper said, holding up his crutches. That's fine as long as Kiriha is alright with all of us leaving. I can just carry all of you down the mountain myself if it comes to that, Luffy said, smiling. Chopper nodded at that. Great, how about we both talk to Kiriha then, Luffy said. Chopper thought about it for a moment before replying, alright. The two left Chopper's room with Chopper using his crutches to help him along on his injured leg. When the two entered the room, Kiriha looked at them expectantly. She knew what was coming now. Doctorine, I have something I need to tell you, Chopper said tentatively. Oh, what's this now? Have you made your decision? Kiriha asked, looking at Chopper. Well, I have decided to join the Straw Hat Pirates. I am going to be someone who fights for his dream, Chopper said with a look of determination in his eye. Have you now? Kiriha said, leaning down to look him in the eye. She studied him for a moment, testing his resolve. Seeing the unwavering dream in his eyes, she sighed. All right then, Kiriha said, standing back up straight. Looking to Luffy, she said, you'd better look after Chopper. I might be a woman in the prime of life, but don't think I wouldn't my golden years tracking you down should you fail to do that. She said that as she gave him a mean look, promising the pain that would follow if he didn't take good care of Chopper. Luffy, looking at her serious, said, I will die before anyone takes him away from my crew. He's our nakama now, so we will all look after each other. Right, Chopper? He said the last part, looking back down at Chopper. He looked up at Luffy and nodded. Yeah, we're nakama now. Chopper now had tears in his eyes as that part fully sunk in. For the first time in his life, he had nakama. He knew deep down that he would do whatever it would take to protect that bond. Kiriha, looking between the two, smiled. Well, if Chopper was going to leave her in this island, well, she was glad it was this man's group who took him away. All right, Chopper, Kiriha said as she crouched down and grabbed hold of the reindeer she had come to view as a son. You take care of yourself now, all right? Same goes to that crew of yours. Use the skills I've taught you to keep them healthy. Pulling him into a hug, tears began to sneak their way down her face. Make your dreams become reality, Chopper. Chopper began crying a thick river of tears at her declaration. Of course, Doctorine. I will become a great doctor who can cure anything. Good, Kiriha said as she released him. Standing back up, she rubbed her eyes. Well, since you are going with, I guess I can release your crewmate into Chopper's care. You have to carry her out of here though. I don't want her to be put under any more strain than she has to. Normally I wouldn't even let her go with at least a few days rest under her belt. And it hasn't even been a full day yet. So you best take good care of my patient, Kiriha said, poking Luffy in the chest to emphasize the last point. Luffy smiled at her. Of course I'll take care of her. Alright, then Chopper, get your stuff together. I'll see you off from the ropeway, Kiriha said, looking down to Chopper, who nodded before taking off back towards his room. Kiriha went back to Dalton and the other villagers. Luffy sat back down on Robin's bed as she began to stir from the slight disturbance. Luffy, she asked as she sat up, rubbing her eyes. Yeah, Robin, we are going to be heading out here pretty soon. Chopper's packing up his things right now, then we will be heading back to our ship, Luffy told her. Robin nodded at this as she stretched her limbs. She didn't want to say anything, but she did feel weak. She hoped she could stand walk, stumbling at the very least. They noticed the villagers began filing out of the room, heading towards the stairs for some reason. Luffy started to suspect he knew what Kiriha was planning, but wasn't entirely sure. Then Chopper ran back into the room with his backpack strapped to his back. Ready? He asked Luffy and Robin. Luffy nodded, and Robin nodded as well. Luffy handed Robin her coat, who put it on quickly. She was surprised when Luffy crouched down by the bed facing away from her. All right, hop on, he said. You're going to carry me there? Robin asked, surprised. Yup, he said, and looking back to her with a grin, he said, doctor's orders after all. Robin nodded and put her arms around his neck. Letting Luffy hold under her thighs, he lifted her up, piggybacking her. Robin was still wearing the straw hat as well, and now that she was bundled in a heavy coat, was ready for the trek down the mountain. Kiriha came out with them as the four made their way out of the castle. Chopper looked out over the snow as he wondered if he could walk through it on crutches. Don't worry, Chopper, I can carry you, Luffy said as he looked at Chopper. Chopper looked up at him and nodded and let Luffy pick him up in his arms. As long as Chopper stayed in his hybrid form, Robin kept her legs circled around Luffy so he wouldn't have to support her weight himself. All right, everyone ready? Luffy asked as he prepared to walk out into the snow. Hearing no complaints, he stepped out into the cold, keeping his body warm for Robin's sake. We will take the ropeway so we can get down the mountain. From there I will carry you back to the village where everyone else is waiting for us, Luffy said. Finally, the four reached their destination, and the newest Straw Hat said goodbye to his mentor. Kiriha gave him one last hug before they parted ways. As the three got on the ropeway, Luffy hopped onto the bicycle-like device that would allow him to move the cart and started pedaling. Chopper gave one last wave towards his mentor as he prepared for his next adventure. Kiriha had made her way back into the castle and was ordering the villagers into moving the cannons at her direction. They would give Chopper a send-off he would never forget. Down in the village, the Straw Hats were wondering what they should do. Sanji, Nami, Alvida and Vivi had left the town to return to the Going Merry. This left Zoro, Usopp, and Kaya in the village waiting for their captain. Kaya had already finished up helping the people of the town with their injuries, and the three were left with little to do. Most of the people were returning to the shelters or homes depending on if their original house was demolished. However, the three Straw Hats were happy to see their captain heading down the road with Robin on his back. They realized he also seemed to have a small creature that was in his arms talking and laughing with their other two crewmates. They realized this might be their newest Nakama that was joining them. With the six meeting up in the village, Luffy began the introductions. Everyone, this is Tony Chopper. He is our newest Nakama. And he is also our newest doctor. Then gesturing to the three, introduced them in turn. This is Zoro. He is my first mate and a swordsman. Zoro nodded his head a little at the introduction. Then this is Usopp, who is our sniper. Usopp smiled at the reindeer and gave him a thumbs up. And finally, this is Kaya, he said, gesturing to the last member of the three. At Chopper's request, Luffy set him down and gave him back his crutches. Chopper walked towards Kaya and held out his paw. Luffy was telling me that you were studying to be a doctor, right? Kaya crouched down and took his offered paw and shook it. Yes, I am. I hope you don't mind me becoming your apprentice. I promise I will work hard and try my best to learn everything you can offer me, Kaya said, smiling at her new mentor. Chopper smiled back as well. Of course, that is all I would want from an apprentice. Chopper thought to himself that it felt strangely empowering to have an apprentice. He had studied long and hard under his mentor, and now he would be passing on all he had learned onto his own apprentice. Turning to the other two, he said, I look forward to sailing with all of you. The group broke out in smiles as they made their way back to the ship, eager to get back and on their way to their next adventure. Chopper was also excited to meet the rest of his new Nakama. It was surreal for him to go from being basically Nakama-less to having an entire crew full of them. He hoped that they would come to accept him as Luffy, Robin, and now Zoro, Usopp, and Kaya had. Back on the ship, the crew was getting settled in. It was getting close to nightfall, and the Straw Hats were wondering if they would be spending the night on this island as well. Vivi couldn't help the pit of worry that grew with the idea of them spending one more day away from her home. She felt a little guilty though, since the reason they had spent so much time on this island was that one of their crew was deathly ill, and they had saved this island from its horrible king. Those worries were erased, however, as Alvida shouted from the crow's nest, I see them. It looks like everyone else is on their way back, with one extra person with them. It seemed like Luffy had been telling the truth when he said they would have a new Nakama. Everyone on board began to gather on deck in anticipation of meeting their latest member. Eventually, the six-person group made their way onto the Going Merry and introductions were made with their newest Nakama and doctor. Nami couldn't help but feel a little irritated when she saw how Robin was being carried by Luffy. But more important than that was the fact she was currently wearing his hat. Nami didn't voice this, however, she noticed her sister sending her looks while mouthing the word. Jealous as mad as that made Nami, she couldn't help but think Nichiko was right. Nichiko wasn't the only one to notice as Robin saw the looks Nami was giving her. The crew was surprised, however, as the sky lit up with great big explosions as cannons were fired off into the air on top of Drum Island's highest peak. Soon they began to notice as the snow started to turn pink. Most of the Straw Hats were confused, but when they saw Chopper smiling happily as tears streamed down his face, realized it must be significant to him in some way. Eventually, they stopped watching the pink snow settle across the country and set to work. Luffy took Robin to the infirmary on their ship as Chopper and Kaya followed him. Luffy would leave her under their care as Chopper gave Kaya her first formal lessons on treating patients with dangerous infection. Robin thanked him and gave Luffy back his hat after he had laid her down in her new bed. Don't worry, Robin, I would do anything for my Nakama, he said as he shot her a smile. He put his straw hat back on and left the room, saying goodnight to everyone in the infirmary. Robin watched him leave and couldn't help but be a little annoyed as her heart rate picked up a bit as he had said that to her. Now who was the one with a little crush? She thought to herself. Back with the rest of the Straw Hats, they were wondering where their next destination was. The log pose had been set, but no one knew where it might go next. Vivi only knew that it probably wouldn't lead to her home, because Drum Island was not a place on the typical path to her island, which made her worry just how they would reach her island without the help of an eternal pose. Luffy, however, managed to lift her concerns as he pulled an Alabasta eternal log pose out, handing it over to Nami. Where did you manage to get your hands on that? Vivi asked in surprise. Eternal log poses were not exactly something you came by easily. We had Mr. Three-Tail Crocodile that he managed to kill us and capture you. So he sent along a log pose so he could bring you back to Alabasta. It seems he planned to capture you alive for some reason. Luffy explained to everyone. So Crocodile thinks we're all dead then. That gives us the advantage when it comes to taking his organization down, Zoro said while thinking about Baroque Works' position. They will be waiting of Mr. 3 to return victorious and won't be looking for us then. That is, at least should Crocodile not suspect anything. If he does, our rows won't last for long, and he will figure out that Mr. 3 betrayed him," Vivi said. "For now though, we will take what we can get whether or not Crocodile figures it out," Nami said. She began giving orders to everyone to help them set sail. Now that they had their destination, it would be best to get going while they still had sunlight. Soon the Straw Hats found themselves heading for their next destination, the great desert island of Alabasta. It had been a couple of days since the crew had left Drum Island, and the crew enjoyed getting to know their newest nakama. Robin and Chopper actually seemed to get along the most, surprisingly enough. Robin just couldn't help but like the cute little doctor, especially when she found out he occasionally loves a good scratch behind his ear despite his protests otherwise. Since their time off the island, Chopper's injuries had been mostly healed. He no longer needed his crutches, although he still walked with a bit of a limp. In time though, that would go away. Robin was also no longer completely bedridden. She had the strength to be able to walk around the ship for a little while, but she continued to sleep in the infirmary at Chopper's recommendation. Then there was one more crew member that Luffy turned his thoughts toward. After their Drum Island adventure, Luffy hadn't really talked to Alvida yet. He knew he probably should, but was having a hard time trying to find out what to say, if he should even say anything. Luffy had heard about how she had saved Vivi from a potentially fatal shot from Mr. 3 and was beginning to wonder if he was wrong about her. Currently, Luffy was sitting alone in the men's quarters thinking about this. He hadn't made it a point to get her off the ship despite what he had said back in the East Blue, though he supposed it would have been cruel to drop her off at Drum Island. And Whiskey Peak was a bounty hunter den run by Baroque Works, so that wasn't really an option either. Now though, they would be heading to Alabasta, which did fit the criteria of an island with a major port town. Alvida would be able to find her way from there, especially if she was given some supplies and money. However, he was coming to regret those words. In the time since then, Alvida had proved to be a reliable crew member, and when it came down to it, he had started to consider her nakama, and he thought the rest of the Straw Hats felt the same way. But then he thought about Kobe. How would he feel if he learned that his friend Luffy was now sailing with someone who had once enslaved him? He hadn't heard Alvida mention him since Luffy had brought Kobe up, so he didn't know if she still felt the same way. Luffy was interrupted from his thoughts as he heard a knock at the door. "Come in," Luffy said, confused. None of the men probably would have knocked since this was their quarters as well. He was surprised to see it was Alvida as she opened the door and stepped in, closing the door behind her. "Hello, Luffy," Alvida said, feeling a little nervous. She knew that it was going to be now or never, since it wouldn't be too long before they landed on Alabasta and Luffy might ask her to leave. "Hi, Alvida. Did you need something?" Luffy asked, noticing her nervousness. Needed to talk to you. I realize that with us getting close to Alabasta that you will probably be telling me to leave soon." Aye. Alvida swallowed as she thought of how to say this. "I want to become a Straw Hat," Alvida said, shedding some tears. "I know I was terrible to a nakama of yours, and there is probably nothing I can ever do to make it up to him. But the time I have spent here on this ship has been the greatest of my entire life. I have nakama now, and, well, that is something I've never had in my life," she admitted quietly. "Before I ate this devil fruit, everyone in my entire life has called me ugly and fat ever since I was a child. I didn't deserve it as a kid, but as time went on, I grew so angry and filled with hate that I eventually became the monster that people thought I was," Alvida said, still crying. "When I finally became a strong pirate, people could no longer call me those names because they were afraid of me. For the first time in my life, it felt like I actually had respect as a woman, and I let it twist me into a monster that would imprison a kid just because I could," Alvida said as she looked down to the ground ashamed. "I didn't regret any of that even after I ate my devil fruit and actually shed my old looks. It was only after sailing with you and others that I actually had to take a hard look at who I am and the person I wanted to be." As Alvida said this, she sunk to her knees and looked at Luffy, still crying. "I know I still have a long way to go to make up for the person I was, and I know I don't deserve to sail with nakama as great as all of you, but I have never wanted anything more in my entire life. You are all people that I want to spend my life sailing with, not because we can be the strongest crew on the Grand Line, but because we all support one another. This crew is filled with genuinely good people, and that's something I have never had in my life. So maybe I don't deserve this crew, but I promise I will do whatever it takes to one day make myself worthy of the Straw Hats. So I beg you, please just give me the chance to prove I can be worthy of sailing with you," Alvida begged, her hands clasped in front of her, tears still streaming down her face. Luffy was shocked at the display. Alvida had laid a lot on the line just then and was now begging him for the chance to remain on board. Luffy stood up and pulled Alvida to her feet as well. Pulling Alvida into a tight hug, he said, "Of course you can sail with us. Despite what I said before, I've come to view you as nakama as well, and I know the others have as well. I was just waiting for you to ask." Alvida smiled as a new stream of tears came forth. This time it was from happiness though. "Thank you, Luffy. I'll make sure you never regret this," Alvida said as she pulled away from him, wiping away her tears. Luffy smiled as well, but there was something else that needed to be mentioned. "I know we will likely run into Kobe sometime down the line, but I hope he can see how much you have changed. I can't force him to though. But if the fact you are my nakama now is something that comes between us, it will just have to be that way, unfortunately. I won't let him capture you," as he said. Alvida nodded and thanked him. "I'm sorry I might be the reason you lose a close nakama though. I just want you to know that is something I will regret most of all if it does happen. It is what it is, Alvida. But that's not something we will hopefully have to deal with for a while now," Luffy said to Alvida. "If it were like last time, it would be Water 7 by the time he met Kobe again, but you never know." Alvida thanked him again and left him alone in the men's quarters. Luffy was thinking about what he should do next. Now that Alvida was going to become a permanent member of his crew, maybe it was time for the truth to come out. It would affect everyone on board now, so he thought the truth needed to be shared. Nakama didn't lie to one another after all, so this couldn't go on any longer. Today would be the day, Luffy decided. He only hoped that his crew wouldn't think he was crazy. He left intending to meet privately with Zoro and Nami. They were the only two who knew after all, and he would probably need help convincing the rest. Luffy, Nami, and Zoro were now discussing below deck what to do about their shared secret. "I think it's time that everyone learns the truth," Luffy said, thinking hard. "Right now we have the majority of our previous crew, and we won't be meeting the rest for some time. What about Vivi? Do you plan on telling her?" Nami asked. Since she had never permanently joined their crew, maybe she should be omitted from the truth. Although she had become close with Vivi, so she would feel guilty withholding the truth from her. Luffy thought about that for a while before deciding, yes, in the end, it does affect her as much as it affects us. She deserves to know what happened. Zoro nodded. "So when are you going to do it?" "Tonight. After dinner, I will talk to everyone, and then we will see what everyone has to say. If they even believe me," Luffy said, scratching his head. Unfortunately, it could be quite likely that some wouldn't believe him, or at least think it was a joke. The whole idea of time traveling was far-fetched after all. "Well, we will be there to help you, Luffy. After all, we believe you, and with us backing you up it will be harder to doubt what you say," Nami said reassuringly. Luffy smiled at his two nakama. "Thanks. I will probably need your help to explain it all anyway." The three went their separate ways. However, they weren't the only ones that had heard what was said. A flutter of petals fell towards the ground as an ear disappeared from a dark corner of the room. Robin was sitting alone in the kitchen thinking about what she had just overheard. She took a sip of tea as she tried to discern what it meant. Robin had grown quite close to this crew, but old habits died hard. So when she noticed that 3 of her crewmates seemed to meet privately semi-frequently, she couldn't help but listen in one time. Robin probably would have felt a bit more guilty spying on Luffy if it hadn't turned out he was lying, or at least withholding the truth from her and the rest of the crew, it seemed. But what was this truth that he needed to share? What did it mean when Luffy said that they had the majority of their old crew together? She continued to drink her tea as she thought about it. It would all come out tonight, it seemed, so she would have to wait and see. As the day went on, Luffy became increasingly nervous about tonight. Watching his crew interact, he was happy to see how close his nakama really were. After all, some had never joined before, so to see them still getting along was good to see. Usopp and Kaya had come out about their relationship as a couple the day after they left Drum Island. It was nice to see, Luffy thought, as it seemed he had 4 nakama that shared more than nakama feelings. He couldn't claim to understand fully, but he knew how much his bond as nakama meant, so to have that plus something more, that was something he had begun to crave. His nakama meant everything to him, so to have that plus an additional bond on top of that, that made you feel even closer. Despite his ignorance as to what it meant, he knew that he still wanted it. At first, he had thought that a bond like that would lessen what it meant to be nakama. He realized how wrong he was though as time went on, and he had observed Nichiko, Sanji, and now Usopp and Kaya. Just because they had a relationship that went more in depth than the others didn't make them any less of nakama. As Luffy realized that, he started to wonder what it really would be like to experience that for himself. He wondered if those feelings had any connections to the strange ones he sometimes had, like when he had spent that night with Nami back in Kakoyashi village, or when Alvida watched him as he worked out. Then there was that moment recently with Robin when Luffy had held her face as she lay in bed. All of those moments had evoked strange new feelings in him he had never experienced before. Did those feelings mean that he wanted to be closer to those 3 women? To start a relationship with them like Usopp had done with Kaya and Sanji had with Nichiko? He knew that people kissed when they were together, but it was something he had never experienced himself. He wondered what it would be like to kiss one of his nakama. He had seen Usopp and Kaya kiss before, so he knew it was likely something they enjoyed doing, but why? Why did people want to kiss other people when they had that special bond? These were a lot of questions that for now, he didn't have the answers to. Today though, something more important was going to happen. Something that could potentially change all of their relationships depending on how everyone took what he had to say. Seeing his crew laugh and talk together, it worried him what could change with the announcement tonight. He didn't think anything too terrible could come out of it, beyond the general idea that most of them had died, which now that he thought about it could be quite terrifying to learn, especially if you were right now at the beginning of a path that had once ended in your own death. He realized he had never really talked with Nami or Zoro about how they honestly felt about that knowledge, though he guessed they didn't regret learning it since they agreed on him sharing the truth with everyone else. More than that, though, was the knowledge that some of them had never even set foot on this ship before, let alone become nakama with the rest of them. How would they feel knowing how drastically their lives had shifted because of his interference? Would they be grateful, or would they rethink their choices when they learned where it could lead? He never wanted anyone to have regrets about joining his crew, so he could only hope that revealing the truth wouldn't get that kind of reaction from anyone. Whether or not revealing the truth went well, it needed to happen. Either way, it would change everything come tonight. Chopper had noticed something interesting after he had begun teaching Kaya. It happened when he had started training her about how to study and treat infections like the one Robin had contracted from an insect. His idea was to introduce some healthy blood to the bacteria and have Kaya observe the results. Kaya had offered her own blood so that she could witness the procedures that Chopper followed to collect a blood sample accurately. That had gone just fine. It was when Chopper had placed the blood on a petri dish and exposed it to the bacteria that things had gone differently than he had planned. He had told Kaya to observe through the microscope, so he hadn't witnessed the initial interaction. Kaya, however, had explained that the bacteria seemed to have been destroyed by her blood cells. Chopper didn't think that was possible, so while he didn't voice his doubts, he assumed that she likely just hadn't interpreted what she saw correctly. However, he did take a look at the dish himself and was surprised to see that none of the cells were infected as he had planned. In fact, there was no evidence of the bacteria being present at all. That was not how he had planned it to go. So while observing through the microscope, he introduced another sample of the bacteria and was amazed at the results. It seemed that despite the fact she was never exposed to this bacteria before, her body appeared to have some kind of defense against it. More surprising was the fact that it didn't even seem to be her white blood cells that were destroying the bacteria. The infection was being killed by merely touching her blood. That was very confusing indeed. Deciding to test it further, Chopper began exposing her blood to different bacteria and viruses. The blood destroyed whatever he threw at it. However, as time went on, the blood took a longer amount of time to fight the infections, until eventually it could no longer fight it, and the blood became infected. He had been taking thorough notes through the whole process and came up with two theories. One was that the blood had a limited amount of time after leaving the body before it lost its power to fight infection. The second being that the blood only had a specific amount of energy to fight infections, and when it ran out it would lose its ability to protect itself. Kaya, do you have any idea why your blood might have this effect on sickness? As far as I can tell, you might be completely immune to common bacteria and viruses. Have you ever been sick in your life? Chopper asked Kaya, curious as to why her body had this ability. No, I have been sick plenty of times in my youth. Although I recently ate a devil fruit that so far we have not figured out the abilities. Could this be one of its powers? Kaya asked interestedly. Was she finally learning what exactly she could do? Fighting bacteria was indeed not what she had expected, but it was undoubtedly useful to a doctor, like the old man had said. A devil fruit power that seemed to be able to fight sickness. Chopper muttered to himself as he thought on the possibility. It was more plausible than just a mutation in her blood that developed later in life. With your help, I would like to study it further, to see exactly how it works and what causes it to lose its ability. Whether it's a specific part of your blood or if it is something about you that causes this, Chopper said, looking at his new apprentice. Kaya agreed to his suggestion, and the two began their work on testing Kaya's power. After a lot of intensive research, they had discovered some limits to the reactions caused by Kaya's ability. For one, it was time that determined how powerful her ability was. The longer her blood left her body, the less power it had, until eventually its time ran out and would no longer work. Another fact was that her distance didn't seem to have a discernible effect on her ability. Though they were limited to the max distance because they were on a small ship, they could test this again when they came to an island. Although Chopper was pretty sure time would be the only factor and not the distance to Kaya. After all, if she were close to the blood, it would follow that it could likely continue to function with her proximity despite leaving her body. Chopper wasn't exactly sure to what level her abilities could cure someone of either. Considering no one had any noticeable diseases on board, they couldn't test her effectiveness on that. When it came to bacteria and viruses, though, her abilities seemed to be able to counteract them all. It was likely, though, that direct contact with the sickness was a condition. If Kaya could use her ability by touching the person that had the illness, then Robin never would have needed a doctor in the first place. Robin would have been healed before they likely even knew what was wrong just by coming into contact with Kaya, as it was after symptoms had presented themselves in Robin. Kaya had been in direct contact many times with Robin, all while attempting to keep her as healthy as she could without a full-fledged doctor. Chopper did wonder though if a small amount of blood from Kaya was injected into Robin whether that could have cured her. While matching blood types was necessary, if a small enough amount of blood could cure someone it could likely be done without detrimental effects even with mismatched blood types. That was assuming that her ability wouldn't automatically counter the effects of having a wrong blood type being transfused. Unfortunately, they had not discovered anything beyond the ability to fight sickness from her powers. That could be the extent of her powers, or they could have only scratched the surface of them. Only time would tell on that point. Kaya, however, was excited. For the first time since eating the devil fruit, she had taken a massive step in discovering her powers. As amazing as her power was to a doctor, she couldn't help but hope that there was more to be discovered. After all, an ability that could only help when someone got sick while useful wouldn't help very much if her nakama were hurt in a fight. Still, though her ability was helpful, only time would tell how useful it would be though. Chopper and Kaya were pulled out of their thoughts when a yell from Sanji interrupted them. "Dinner time," he shouted, and the Straw Hats began to stop what they were doing and head towards the kitchen to enjoy a meal with their nakama. Luffy couldn't help the nervousness he felt. After dinner would come as a revelation to the Straw Hats, and he worried what their reactions could be. Robin was also looking forward to the after-dinner conversation. If what she had heard still held true, then after dinner something big would be revealed to them. But what was the secret their captain had been keeping from them? As dinner drew to a close, some of the Straw Hats began to notice their captain's withdrawn behavior. All of them knew just how excited Luffy was around any meal time. So to see him silently eating a meal without joining in on everyone's conversations was beginning to concern some of them. Nami and Zoro knew the reason while Robin only suspected the cause. As people began putting down their forks and knives, Luffy surprised them by addressing them all. "Everyone, there is something that I need to share with you all. Something that happened before I met many of you that affect you all now," Luffy said, looking around to all his nakama. That announcement stopped all conversation amongst the table. None of them were used to such solemn declarations from Luffy. What was it he felt he needed to share? Some noticed that Nami and Zoro didn't look too surprised at this, but those two had been sailing with Luffy before the rest of them, so perhaps they knew what he was talking about. "Let's gather outside, and when everyone's out there I will tell you guys everything." Luffy said this as he stood up and walked outside. Nami and Zoro followed him immediately and were closely followed by Robin. The rest of the crew shared nervous glances before they left as well. Out on the deck of Going Merry, Luffy was standing in front of the figurehead that he spent a considerable amount of time relaxing on. Nami and Zoro stood close by on either side of him. While they didn't know everything, they did know enough to hopefully help convince the rest of them. As the others filed out and began to stand in front of him, a new wave of nervousness hit him. Now it was time to reveal everything that had happened. They were his nakama after all and deserved to know the truth. Finally, they were all on deck and looking at their captain. There was a tension in the air as few knew what was going to be said here. What was so important that their captain felt the need to discuss it with all of them? What happened in the past that could affect them all now? Luffy took a deep breath before he began. "What I am about to say, while it may seem impossible, I promise you all that it is the absolute truth. I hope by now that you all recognize that I would do anything for any one of you. You are all my nakama, and I consider my crew to be the most precious thing to me in the entire world," Luffy said, looking out over his crew. He could tell that what he was saying was starting to increase the tension they all felt. Luffy hoped that his crew at least now knew just how important what he was about to reveal was. "Before most of you met me, I had been sailing for several years with a group of nakama that over time had become people I view as closer than family. We fought together, we dreamed together, and most importantly, we sailed the world with each other," Luffy said, slowly laying out the point he was trying to make. "We encountered our fair share of good and bad times. At one point we found ourselves separated and alone. It was during this separation that all of us trained so that one day we would be strong enough never to be separated again," Luffy said before gesturing to the scar on his chest. "I received this scar during our time apart from each other. It happened after I learned that my brother, Porcas Diaz, who was a pirate himself, was going to be executed by the world government. He was a member of the Whitebeard Pirates, who were led by one of the 4 emperors. That was a name those who had come from the East Blue would likely not have heard, but Vivi and Robin certainly had. Almost everyone who had spent some time on the Grand Line would learn their name eventually. Only the 4 strongest pirates in the world held that title, Edward Newgate being heralded as the strongest of them all. Not only that, but the crew got a feeling of dread as they heard him refer to his brother in the past tense. I wasn't going to let them execute my brother without a fight, however. When I fought to save him, an admiral by the title Akenu interfered. He was a lot stronger than I was and almost killed me," he said, tracing the scar, remembering how he had gotten it. "In fact, I would have been killed if my brother had not jumped in front of him and taken the blow for me. His fist went straight through Ace, and it struck me, but not enough to kill me immediately. Though I would have died had my allies or the allies of my brother not brought me to safety," Luffy said as he recalled that day in perfect clarity. A tear made its way down his face as he remembered the pain of his brother's death. Most of the Straw Hats couldn't help but feel the anguish their captain had gone through. To know that the man who they looked up to, who was usually happy and carefree, had felt this level of despair was sobering. Robin was beginning to wonder just how that was possible. One of the 4 Emperor's subordinates being executed was sure to be an incident broadcast over the entire world. How had none of them heard of something like that before? It was because of Ace's sacrifice that I am standing before you all now, Luffy said, looking over his crew. However, that was not the last time I clashed with the Admiral. We fought one more time a few years after my brother's execution. This time, however, I had all of my Nakama with me, and we thought we were strong enough to take down him and any other marine that had sailed with him. Luffy said this as he leaned his back against Mary's figurehead and slid down, sitting on the deck. Taking off his hat, he held it in his hands as he told the rest of the story. In the end, it was only Akenu and myself left standing. All of my Nakama gave their lives trying to protect one another from him. I was prepared to die. Without my Nakama, it seemed pointless to continue on. However, I was saved once again from a killing blow dealt by Akenu, Luffy said. The rest of the Straw Hats were growing increasingly nervous at his story. How had they not known of an entire crew that Luffy once had that had been wiped out by the Marines? Just how much adventuring had Luffy done before meeting the rest of them? Though that did explain why their captain seemed to be unusually strong. The man who saved me then gave me a choice. He said that I could continue my life from there, leaving behind all my dead Nakama, and living with what I had left, which would have been my straw hat and the clothing on my back. Or, he said as he paused, weighing his next words carefully, he said that he could send me back in time and make sure that it never happened again. As he said this part, he put the hat back on his head with the brim covering his eyes as fresh tears streamed down his face. Realization struck the Straw Hats one by one as the meaning behind his words hit them. They looked around at one another as the reality of what Luffy was trying to explain to them became understood. The crew that Luffy had lost had been the Straw Hats. If what Luffy was saying was true, then each and every one of them had died. Now Luffy was trying to make sure that tragedy never happened again. Robin looked at Zoro and Nami to see their reactions to this. Neither of them was experiencing the shock of what had just been told to the rest of them. So she was right. They had known about what Luffy had just finished explaining. Zoro was clutching his sword as if he was prepared to fight an enemy that might appear. It was probably just a source of comfort for him after what had just been revealed. Zoro and Nami were looking down as the pain of what their captain had experienced finally came to light. Kaya was the first one to speak after the revelation. Luffy, are you telling us that you come from a future where we all die? Luffy was silent for a moment before replying. Not all of you died that day. Some of you had never set foot on this ship before. This caused some to look around in confusion. Who exactly was new to the Straw Hats and which ones had died? Nichiko and Kaya, both of you in the future I come from, would have had to learn that your family and Nakama were never coming home from a newspaper. This caused Nichiko to look toward her sister, who met her gaze with a sad look, and Kaya to look at Usopp, who reached for her hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze, likely to remind her that he was still here, despite what Luffy had said would or had happened. Alvida, we never sailed under the same flag. You were a part of the Buggy Alliance. Alvida was a bit surprised to hear that, though it did make more sense if she hadn't sailed with him before. Finally, Vivi, you stayed on your island and eventually take over as queen. Luffy finished. The 3 new Straw Hats were thinking about how while they had joined in the future that Luffy described, they never had. However, Luffy said, once again trying to choose his words carefully, just because you never joined the Straw Hats doesn't mean all of you were still alive in the end. I have no reason to think Nichiko or Kaya were harmed at all, but you too. He trailed off, looking between Vivi and Alvida. You didn't make it till the end, Luffy said sadly. Alvida knew that life on the sea meant living with risks, but she had to wonder how she had died if she had never joined the Straw Hats. As time went on, the Straw Hat Pirates and many other groups grew more powerful, and as their power grew, so did their infamy. At a certain point, the world government and more importantly the Celestial Dragons decided that drastic measures needed to be taken to rein in the pirates of the newest age, Luffy said as he looked back up at his crew. He stayed seated, but his tears had stopped. The warlords of the sea were disbanded and either eliminated where possible or drove off. Buggy the Clown and his alliance were one of the first to be hunted down and killed. Alvida, while I don't know for sure if you were killed or not, the world government declared you dead, Luffy said, looking at his new Nakama. Alvida nodded numbly at that knowledge. After the warlords were ended, they began culling a lot of the smaller pirate groups, especially those who were heading towards the New World. They didn't want the chance that any of them could join one of the 5 Emperors, so they killed them where they could. 5 Emperors? Robin asked in confusion. She had heard him mention the 4 earlier, so who was the 5th? At that, Luffy actually smiled a little as he answered. I became known as the 5th Emperor eventually. The Straw Hats became a bigger and stronger force, and we eventually formed the Straw Hat Grand Alliance. We proved that we could stand on even ground with the other warlords, so they named me the 5th. though in the end there were fewer emperors by the time our adventure ended. That was why the celestial dragons began to personally fund more concentrated efforts on bringing us down. We were viewed as the biggest threat to the world government because we never shied from conflict with them. That and the fact that my father's identity was revealed to the world, I was beginning to look like a threat to the world order that the celestial dragons needed to maintain. Not everyone agreed with the dragons, though. Some kingdoms, especially those that we had personally helped, viewed us as allies, not enemies to be exterminated. It was then that Luffy looked toward Vivi. Vivi felt the weight of that look as she realized what he was about to say. One noble in particular was very vocal in her support because she had once sailed with us. The celestial dragons felt the need to curtail any possible dissent among their government, so they decided to make an example of the Alabasta Kingdom and its queen. Luffy said as he found the next part hard to tell. It had been a while since this had happened, but the pain was still there. Fleet Admiral Sakazuki was given permission to use a buster call on Alabasta, eliminating everyone on the island. They felt that cutting off the head of the support amongst their own would keep anyone else from ever allying with the Straw Hats. They were right, Luffy said finally. Vivi looked at him, shocked at his words. The world government would go so far to eliminate her entire kingdom to keep control. Robin, unfortunately, knew just how far the government would go to eliminate an enemy. Experiencing the buster call that had destroyed her own home had taught her that lesson as a child. Eventually, the world government caught up to us. With the largest fleet to ever be formed under one purpose, they attacked us. In the end, it took almost everyone they threw against us to bring us down. It ended up being myself and the Fleet Admiral in the end. No one else had survived that conflict, Luffy said, and looked again at each of his nakama in turn. He at least didn't notice anyone looking at him like they thought he was lying. There isn't much proof that I can offer beyond telling you things that will happen soon or things that I know about any of you that you have never told me about, Luffy said, trying to wind down his explanation. It had been a lot of heavy topics to hit everyone with, and he hoped that they would take the time to digest what he had said. Robin took this moment to speak on something she had noticed earlier. I take it that Nami and Zoro already knew at least some of this. The two in question nodded their heads as Luffy explained. Yes, Zoro had already met me before I was sent back, so he witnessed the drastic change I underwent that caused a lot of questions. Nami had met me right after I was sent back as well, so both of them learned of it at the same time. The crew let that sink in. It was outlandish to think that the story they had heard was the truth, but considering it was their captain who was telling it, they felt that was the case. The fact that Nami and Zoro seemed to accept it made it look even more plausible. So what do we do now, Captain? Sanji said, taking a drag from his cigarette. Luffy thought about that question. It would take time for what he had said to everyone to sink in fully, and they would most certainly have more questions as it did. For now, I would say get some rest if you can. I don't expect all of you to believe me right away. I realize how all this must sound. I just didn't want to go forward with the lie any further than I already have. I only ask that you trust that I would do anything in my power to protect each and every one of you, Luffy said, standing back up. Luffy, Kaya began to say as she took a step forward. I won't claim to speak for everyone, but I don't think any of us would be here if we doubted you as a captain and more importantly as Nakama. If you say that what you have said here is true, then I believe you. At that declaration, many of the Straw Hats gave their support as well. This was their captain, and he was their Nakama. He wouldn't ever lead them astray. I also know that none of us will let that happen. With your help, I think we will become stronger than ever as Straw Hats. We are all Nakama now. And even if some of us never made the journey before, we are in it together now. I won't let my Nakama be taken from me. Kaya finished proudly and still holding Usopp's hand tightly. The Straw Hats gave a collective cheer of agreement as they all gave their support as well. The story was crazy, but so was life on the sea. Every moment had been one crazy adventure to another. This time each and every one of them would try their hardest to make sure this adventure never ended. Luffy smiled and began to cry again at the support from his Nakama. As he did so, he noticed the smiles and tears all around him as well. First, it was Nami who hugged him, but then she was followed by each of the other members as they joined together in one big group hug. Let's follow our dreams and make our Nakama's dream become a reality, Luffy said, holding his Nakama close. This was met by another cheer from his Nakama. This time the Straw Hats wouldn't get brought down against any enemy. They would succeed, for they were the Straw Hat Pirates. Crocodile was staring down at his last report from the Unluckies. The Straw Hats were alive. Crocodile crumpled the paper and tossed it away in anger. A few days ago he couldn't help but feed that growing worry in his gut that Mr. 3 had lied to him. So he had sent the Unluckies to track his progress between Alabasta and the Drum Kingdom. Sure enough, what they discovered was the Straw Hat ship making its way to Alabasta, likely with the help of the eternal log pose he had sent his agent. That was a problem, one that he now had time to counter. Crocodile looked towards his prison and towards the person it contained. It seems your daughter and those Straw Hat pests got another one of my agents to betray me, Crocodile said, his tone not betraying his anger. Inside the cage, Cobra started to laugh, causing the chains holding him down to rattle. "I told you my daughter would outsmart you, Crocodile," Cobra said with a smirk. "I wouldn't be so cocky if I were in your position, Cobra. She may have bested some of my agents, but she will be in for a rude surprise when she comes home to see her dear old dad," Crocodile said, smiling around his cigar. "Mr. 2 is doing an admirable job of ruling this country in your stead. In fact, so far even your most trusted advisors seem to suspect nothing. That's what you get for surrounding yourself with fools like them," Crocodile said, enjoying the look that came across Cobra's face as he did so. Cobra looked back out at Crocodile before yelling back, "You won't get away with this, Crocodile. My daughter will come back and what you've done here will be revealed to the world." "Well, we shall see about that," Crocodile said before turning around and heading back towards his office. Crocodile had some new orders for his subordinates. The Straw Hats were going to arrive soon, and Baroque Works would be ready for them. Crocodile would also have to deal with those Marines that had been seen sniffing around his city. If the world government got word of his plans before he could enact them, he would find himself stripped of his title and imprisoned. He wasn't sure why they were here, but the fact that they were was troubling. Life was starting to go back to normal for the Straw Hats. With the previous night's revelation, all of the crew had needed time to think about what had been said. Some of the crew got over it quite easily. Sanji and Zoro had taken everything in stride, it seemed. When they had learned that they had failed before, the two realized that they would just have to be stronger this time. These two redoubled their efforts into their training as well as their haki exercises. These two were among the strongest on their crew, right behind their captain. But they knew how far behind they truly were from their captain as it stood right now. As far as they were concerned, they had to close that gap as fast as possible. They would be of no use to their crew if Luffy was the one who always had to step up to be their protector. Usopp and Kaya also found themselves reluctant to leave each other's side. They had both been hit pretty hard with Luffy's speech the night before. The idea that Usopp had died while Kaya would be waiting for him on the other side of the world, not knowing that he was dead until she received the morning newspaper that would detail the heroic victory of the Marines over the dreaded Straw Hats. Kaya would never get to hear what adventures Usopp had been on, would never get to see the boy she had grown up with transform into the brave warrior of the sea he would one day become. When Kaya wasn't with Usopp, she threw herself wholeheartedly into her training with Chopper. With his help, she had been learning the limits of her powers. Without Chopper, she probably wouldn't have even begun to figure out her powers. Usopp was more intent than ever on creating new and powerful ammo for his slingshot. He needed to come up with more strategy and variety with his weapons. The idea being that with a tool for every job, he could help ensure that Kaya and his crew would never suffer a defeat like Luffy had described. Nichiko had been training her devil fruit to the best of her ability. Luffy had admitted to her privately that the reason he knew so much about the gum fruit was that it once had been his. She was surprised to hear it, but it made sense why he knew so much about it then. He had explained to her some techniques that he had come up with in his time that she would have to train hard for before she could replicate. Here second was a method of speeding up her body that she was hoping to accomplish first. Luffy had talked her through the idea, but she would have to get more used to her new rubber body before Nichiko would be able to effectively use it. However, Luffy was confident she would one day be able to use the technique he had, and Luffy would help Nichiko get even better from there. Nichiko would have to, after all. Not only did she have Nami to look after, but now she had a crew of Nakama to help protect as well. They were all family, and Nichiko wouldn't let them be taken away if she had anything to do about it. Nami was busy charting their current course. She had attempted to draw some sea charts, but found her thoughts being drawn back to the conversation from the previous night. She had only known a fraction of what had occurred, she realized. The tragedy that Luffy had laid out was somehow even worse than she had imagined. Sometimes her captain seemed larger than life, like no one could ever bring him down. After all, he defeated enemies that she could never have hoped to fight herself. When Nami had sailed under Arlong, he had been an insurmountable monster that with one wrong move could wipe her whole village out if he wanted. She had never stood a chance against the fishmen. Luffy had come along and brought her up out of that life. He had defeated Arlong with an ease that astounded everyone. Not only that, but he had continued to meet each challenge that came his way with the ease he had in the first fight Nami had witnessed with him. So to see Luffy as everyone had seen last night was quite a shock to the image she had built of him. It didn't make him any less in Nami's eyes, but she began to realize just where she herself stood. Luffy had defeated people that Nami in her wildest dreams couldn't hope to defeat. Yet there were monsters out there that could bring even her captain down. So what chance did she have on this journey? Nami didn't have the crazy strong powers that most of the crew seemed to have. Was she destined to just be a navigator who would always stand out of harm's way while her Nakama put their life on the line for her sake? That wasn't the life she wanted. Navigator would always be her role on this ship, but she didn't want to be just the helpless damsel who would always need her crew to protect her. But she only had a bow staff to protect herself with. What use was that against people with enough strength to break it like a toothpick? against people whose entire body could create explosions. There was no way she could train with a wooden stick to the point she could overcome those challenges, so what chance did she really have on this journey? Maybe she would have to talk to Luffy. What had she done before to get stronger? Nami knew that there was no way she would have been the type to hide behind her friends the entire journey, so what had she done to at least stand on her own? Nami didn't think it was likely that she would ever get close to Luffy's strength, but surely there was a way to shorten the huge gap that existed between them. For now, she had asked Usopp for help in building a weapon of her own. If she wanted to be of use saving Vivi's country, she would need every tool she could get her hands on. Nami only hoped that it would be done before they could get to the island. Vivi was coming to terms with the fate that seemed to be hanging over her people. As it was now, they were threatened by a pirate who was sanctioned by the world government. In the future, her island would be completely wiped out by the world government. Why was it that the demise of innocent people seemed to be either directly or indirectly caused by the governing body that should be protecting innocents? Vivi had thought that the world government was a force for good, but she was beginning to have second thoughts. Luffy had revealed that the world government could be used as a puppet to suit the needs of the Celestial Dragons, a group she had only heard rumors of their oppressive nature. Vivi was aware that they held influence over the government and had heard that they dealt in human trafficking. But maybe they were even worse than she had realized. If they held such sway over the way the world was run, then what right did the world government have to pass judgment on pirates like the Straw Hats? When she had first met the Straw Hats, she had judged them like she had all other pirates. They were scum just like any other pirate in her eyes. She had seen many in her time as a spy within Baroque works. She had been surrounded by pirates who were of the worst sort in that organization. But the knowledge that the leader of the organization that intended to bring down her country was, in fact, an infamous pirate himself came as no surprise to her. Vivi would come to realize, though, that not all pirates were that way. There were those like the Straw Hats that only wanted to follow their dreams and to help others to find their own. They were willing to help those who couldn't help themselves and to lay their life on the line to no benefit of their own. By comparison, the Celestial Dragons were scum of the lowest caliber, and they were the ones who were upheld as higher than justice. They stood above everyone else as if they were gods. People were tools to further their own goals and nothing more. When something threatened their standing, they would bring down the wrath of the world government on them. What right did people like that to judge the Straw Hats? If they were willing to wipe out a nation of innocents to keep their standing, then why should anyone be forced to bow to such a group? If she went on to be the leader of her people, would she just be a small cog in the machine that perpetuated such atrocities? What did that mean for her future and her people's future? Would she be expected to stay silent when the Celestial Dragons, and by extension the world government, decided that the Straw Hats needed to be exterminated? Vivi couldn't risk her people being killed for that, but she would never be willing to allow such injustice to occur either. If Vivi stayed silent as the Straw Hats were hunted down, then she would be just as guilty as Celestial Dragons in anything that resulted. And what about any country that had the courage to stand up for the Straw Hats in her place? They would surely be used as an example, just as her own people would. What could she do about it, though? Vivi couldn't stay silent, nor could she let her people die for what she believed in. She could accept the cost if it was only her life on the line. But it was her people that would suffer more. How could she stand up for what was right without condemning the people of Alabasta? Alvida was doing better than she had thought she would be with the news that she had been killed once before. In her previous life, she had sailed with Buggy the Clown and gone so far as to be in an alliance with him. There was no way that what she had then compared to what she had now. She hadn't sailed with Buggy long, but she knew what he was like. He was ultimately a coward. Buggy wouldn't put his life on the line for the sake of his crew. His crew was to be used to further his own goals. They weren't nakama, so it was fine if they were used for such a purpose. That was something that she herself had once been guilty of. Luffy was different in every way imaginable. He would never use his nakama for his own selfish purposes. If anything, he would let himself be used if it meant helping someone he considered nakama. Luffy would be the first one to lay his life on the line for their sake. He also had the ability to make others want to do the same, she realized. Alvida smiled as she thought about the path she now followed. Even if it would one day end in her giving her life, she knew that if it was for the sake of her nakama, then she could live with that sacrifice. Compared to her life with Buggy, dying for this crew would be an honor. Chopper had gone through a very emotionally exhausting couple of days. It had first begun when Wapol had returned to the island. He had imprisoned both himself and his mentor when he had taken back his castle. Not only that, but he had been forced to fight for the amusement of Drum's unwelcome king. Then, when he was almost sure that he would be dying by the hands of that very king, a human had come out of nowhere and saved his life. It had been almost unimaginable for Chopper to think that another human could ever see him as something other than a monster. Up until that point, there had only been 2 humans in his life that had treated him as a person, unless you counted when Dalton had saved his life. But he hadn't known the man's name when he had. Now, as he stood on this ship, he had gone from no nakama to an entire group of people that wanted to be his nakama. To be a pirate had been something he had only dreamed of in his wildest fantasies. To be a pirate was to never give up. Chopper had felt like the Straw Hat Pirates embodied that desire, and their captain most of all. Now he knew the terrible secret that their captain had now. He had met them all and sailed with most of them once before. In the end, though they had all died to save their captain, Chopper was very concerned for obvious reasons when he had learned this. It seemed like it was impossible for time travel to even be real. But he wanted to believe, and with the support of the other Straw Hats realized that Luffy must have been telling the truth. Chopper was starting to realize just how right he had been when he thought that this crew embodied the never-give-up spirit, to know that their path could very likely mean their end and to continue on unflinching. They would all achieve their dreams or they would die trying. That was what it meant to be a pirate after all. There was one person, in particular, that was torn on what to do. Robin had been trained from a young age that she couldn't trust people. People were to be used when it could benefit her and discarded when they were no longer useful. If Robin hadn't learned that lesson, she would have been the one used and abandoned. That was just how it worked in this world. Or so she thought. Now she wasn't so sure she thought as Robin looked at the people she sailed with now. Normally Robin would keep her distance with people like these. She was never one who was part of the group. That was why she had crafted the persona of the mysterious and deadly assassin, one whose presence could incite fear in lesser people. Deep down she wanted to trust Luffy. Robin liked to think that he had proven himself to be an honest and noble pirate. This feeling was overshadowed by her own dark thoughts, the ones that said no one could be trusted, that she could never deserve people like that. And it was all a ruse that she was currently falling for. That was the part of Robin that screamed at her to run and get away as fast as possible. Robin knew that she could manage it if she truly set her mind to it, but she wondered if she would have the strength it took to leave the Straw Hats behind forever. Robin was beginning to doubt that she would have the resolve to truly escape them. So far they could never find her. Because despite all the thoughts that said that she would never deserve this and that it was all a deception, there was a small voice that said she was worth it. Robin wanted to have Nakama like this, so despite what she thought, she also felt the desire to surrender herself completely to the Straw Hats as well. Nakama had been a foreign concept to her, but it seemed that she finally had something with this group. Why did it have to be overshadowed by all this doubt, she wondered to herself. Robin noticed suddenly that Luffy was looking at her carefully from nearby. When he met her gaze, he began to make his way over to her. "Let's talk," Luffy said as he stopped in front of her. Robin looked up at him as she studied her captain. It seemed he had seen the inner turmoil she was struggling with and wanted to help. So Robin nodded, and when Luffy gestured for her to follow him, she did so. Soon the two of them were alone below deck. Luffy leaned against the wall and looked at her expectantly. It seemed he wanted her to voice her concerns before he would talk. "I want to believe you," Robin began. "It's just that what you say happened seems impossible." Luffy nodded at that. "I know that it is hard to believe. So how can I help you start to trust me?" Robin thought about that for a while. Neither of them said anything at this time, and Luffy was content to wait for her answer. "I want you to tell me how I joined your crew the last time. Why I sailed with you in the first place," Robin said finally. What had brought them together in the past? That was what she wanted to know. Luffy looked at her and said, "All right. So the first time we met." Luffy started to explain how their adventure had begun. Unlike this time where she had joined after meeting the Straw Hats, she had left them to go back to Crocodile the first time. Luffy talked about how their time together in Alabasta affected her and how Robin had actually saved his life. In the end, Robin had joined the crew after she said that she had nothing to live for, and since Luffy had saved her life, he would have to take responsibility. He talked of their adventures that had eventually led to the confrontation with EP9 at Water 7, how Robin had left them in an attempt to save the rest of the Straw Hats from facing the wrath of the world government because of her. Luffy had declared war on the world government for her instead, despite her intention to spare them from that. Then came all the adventures that followed, their eventual separation and their reunion as well, and the end of his story with their final battle with the Marines. Robin listened carefully as she sat down, absorbing the story that he was telling her. He had gone into detail on things that there was no reasonable explanation for his knowledge besides the fact that he had heard it from her mouth once before. The fact that he knew the fate of O'Hara and her dream to uncover the history written on the poneglyph. Those were all things that few knew. Fewer still that were even alive. Certainly not something a pirate who a few months ago had just started his journey in the East Blue. "So it's all true," Robin said in amazement as Luffy finished his story. Luffy nodded his head. "Yes, it is. However, this time the ending will be much better for us. I promise you that." Robin looked him in the eye as he said that. She saw the resolve that shone fiercely from his gaze. She knew if there was anyone in this world that could save them from such a fate, that it was going to be this man before her. Robin smiled, the first genuine smile she had in a long time. "I know, Captain. Together I think we will all work hard to protect our Nakama." Luffy smiled back at that. He knew his crew was strong, but he had been surprised to see the resolve they had displayed since he had revealed his past. He supposed he shouldn't have doubted them. After all, This was the best crew in the entire world and he held the honor of being their captain. Finally, the Straw Hats could finally see the destination they had set out for from Drum Island. The desert island of Alabasta was finally on their horizon. This caused a lot of excitement amongst the crew. It seemed like this next island was going to have a lot in store for all of them. Luffy realized that there was probably some things he should run by everyone first though. On their journey here they had never encountered Bon Clay or Mr. Two as he went by in Baroque Works, so while they weren't currently in danger of him transforming into one of them they couldn't overlook the danger of it. Not only that, but as long as nothing had changed with Ace he should be seeing his brother again for the first time in many years. That was also something he should talk with his crew about now that they knew his previous fate. Everyone was already on deck so getting their attention was easy. "Alright everyone, listen up," Luffy said looking around at his Nakama who looked in their direction. "One thing we should all be concerned about is Mr. Two and his ability to transform into anyone he touches," Luffy said to everyone. "Now he hasn't gotten any of our faces yet, but it's better to be safe than sorry." Luffy ran them through the idea they had before. They all drew X's on their arms and then covered them with a strip of cloth. This way if we ever have any doubts if one of us has been replaced we can just ask to see what's under the cloth. He won't know to replicate that if he hasn't seen it, Luffy explained to the others. The plan had seemed to work last time so no need to change it. The second thing is, and at this, he smiled which caused his crew to look at him oddly, "My brother should be here." The Straw Hats realized the reason for his smile now. "How long has it been since you saw him last?" Nami asked. "Well, it has been about 3 years now since I've seen him in either time," Luffy said thinking about his brother. "Luffy, if you don't mind me asking, what are you going to do about your brother? Is there anything you can do here that will prevent his execution?" Robin asked. She knew Luffy wouldn't let his brother go to his death when he could avoid it. "I don't know yet. I know that I will run into the man who captures Ace before he will, but I don't want to risk that I'm wrong either," Luffy said thinking. "I guess we will just have to see what happens. I will try and convince him to sail with us, but I doubt I will be able to without revealing what I know." "Well, I'm sure you will figure something out, Luffy," Vivi said. "You're right. Besides, right now we have to worry about your country. We can figure out Ace later," Luffy said looking back to his crew and Vivi. "Well, Vivi, what do you want to do first?" "I vote we go and kick Crocodile's ass, but I'm going to guess you want to talk to the rebels, right?" Vivi thought about that and was wondering what would be the best course of action. "Maybe we should split up. Whoever Luffy feels should go to Crocodile's casino can go with him, and the rest can help me talk sense into the rebels. Right now we have 2 main goals. One is to keep the rebels from attacking. The second will be to expose and stop Crocodile from enacting his plans for this country," Vivi explained to her Nakama. "If we can keep the fighting from starting until Crocodile's deception is revealed, we can avoid as much innocent bloodshed as possible," Vivi said. "Luffy, you probably know the best way for us to split up though." Luffy thought about that for a minute. He remembered that last time a lot of the rebels had actually been members of Baroque Works. Then again he didn't know what had changed because of Robin's betrayal and any other little thing he had done that could change Crocodile's response. When it came down to it compared to how much danger Vivi would be in, Luffy's mission would be easy. Kick Crocodile's ass, been there done that. "I think it would be best if Vivi is escorted by most of you. As it is, her mission is the most crucial part. Crocodile will have a lot of forces focused on making sure that fight happens. So if and when he figures out we are all still alive he is going to send anyone he needs to stop you," Luffy said laying out his plan. "Also a lot of the rebels are probably going to actually be made up of Baroque Works members as well. So if any of them recognize you, they will try and stop you as well. So I think if Robin and I head to his casino then we should be able to handle things there while the rest of you focus on keeping the fighting from happening." "Are you sure about that, Luffy? Just the 2 of you? If you're going to face Crocodile and his cronies shouldn't you have more backup than that?" Zoro asked confused. Robin spoke up. "No, Luffy actually might have a point. Crocodile has never shown his face to any of the Baroque members other than myself. Although he will likely choose Mr. One as my replacement so it should be at most only the 2 of them," Robin explained. "The rest of Baroque Works will be spread throughout Alabasta following their boss orders." Vivi nodded at that. It made a lot of sense actually since Crocodile's identity was a closely guarded secret. It wouldn't make sense for any of his members to be at the place directly connected with his public identity. "Crocodile isn't going to have anyone I can't handle by his side so I am more concerned making sure you're safe to follow through on your part," Luffy said smiling at Vivi. "Kicking Crocodile's ass is the easy part of this plan in my opinion. You'll have the hard part making sure your people remain safe." Vivi's eyes watered up at that. "You're right. Thank you so much, everyone. If it wasn't for all of you I never would have made it this far." The rest of the crew smiled at that and Luffy said, "Don't worry about that, Vivi. We're your Nakama now so there is nothing we wouldn't do to help you and your country." The other Straw Hats cheered at that. Vivi smiled back at her Nakama. Whoever would have guessed that the small pirate ship that had met her all those weeks ago would have such a large effect on her life. A Straw Hat's first order of business was to get supplies and disguises. They needed to be able to fit in with the locals if they wanted to get by any Baroque Works members. Luffy had told them about how they had first met his brother in Nanohana, so they had made the decision to head there first, since the new rebel hideout was also located in the nearest town that would help Vivi's quest as well. Vivi had been surprised that they had moved their base, but Luffy explained that Yuba was now more of a ghost town than a city. Vivi had been extremely distressed to hear that, but Luffy had reminded her that it wouldn't be that way for long. "So do you think your brother is still in this town?" Sanji asked. "Maybe. Last time he waited in this town because he was in the area hunting Blackbeard and hoped to run into me," Luffy explained. "If he isn't here, then I don't know where I'll find him." "Well, no point worrying about if you can't when we don't know for sure he isn't here. Where did you find him last time?" Nami asked. "Well," Luffy thought about his last time coming here. "I found him at some restaurant. I feel like it was named after a bean or something." "Oh yeah," Luffy exclaimed as he remembered something else that had happened at the restaurant. "Smoker is likely here as well." "Smoker?" Vivi asked. "Is this an ally or an enemy?" "He's a marine captain we ran into on the East Blue," Zoro explained. "Do you mean to tell me that he followed us all the way out here?" If Smoker was here, then Zoro wondered if that girl would be here as well. "Yup, he pretty much never forgives us for slipping by him. He constantly follows after us, though he has helped us on a few occasions." Luffy laughed. "Great," most of the crew thought. Just what they needed, a marine watchdog following their every move. "Anything else we should know about before we get there?" Nami asked, annoyed. "Honestly, their captain could do a little better with forewarning them since he was from the future. Not that I can think of. We can't count on a lot of events happening since who knows what has changed with Crocodile's organization and timetable because of what's happened," Luffy explained. "That's why I want most of you to travel together. I know all of you will be able to handle whatever Crocodile throws at you." Soon they found themselves putting down anchor as they landed. The crew got out and gathered on the mainland. Vivi pulled aside Karu before handing him a letter. "I need you to deliver this to Father Karu. It is very important he gets this info, and you're the one I can trust to get it to him fast." "Can you do it, Karu?" Vivi asked, although she knew her loyal friend would do it. Karu saluted to her, and with a quick caw, he took off running. Most of the Straw Hats were surprised to see just how fast the bird could run, considering none of them had seen him in action thus far. The Straw Hats then set off for the nearest town wearing gray cloaks to conceal their appearances. If they didn't want to look like criminals, though, they would have to find clothes in town that concealed them better, especially since almost all of them were wanted pirates. "So Luffy, what do you think you're going to say to your brother?" Nami asked curiously. After all, the last time Luffy had seen him would have been his death, so this was going to be an emotional reunion for her captain. "I don't really know. I think I'll have to get him to help us with Crocodile. Maybe I will tell him I've heard some rumors of Blackbeard to get him to help or something," Luffy said. "So do you think you'll try and get him to join us?" Usopp asked. "Well, I would love it if Ace joined my crew, but I doubt he would at this point. Right now he is a part of the Whitebeard Pirates, so I doubt he'd leave them," Luffy explained. The Straw Hat crew were now entering the outskirts of the city, so they stopped talking about their plans as they set about finding some better disguises. Eventually, they found a large clothing store, and 3 of the girls went in to find some suitable clothing for everyone. They didn't want to attract too much attention by bringing everyone into the shop. It was also brought up that Sanji shouldn't be allowed to pick out the clothes for the girls, much to his annoyance. So it was decided that Alvida, Nami, and Nichiko would be the ones to pick out clothes while the rest waited outside. Soon enough, the girls came back out with their purchases. The 3 had already changed and waited for the others to do so. Robin, Vivi, and Kaya headed back inside to change, while the men just found a broken-down building to do so. Luffy found it odd that he seemed to have different clothes than the rest of them. The rest of the men had been given full outfits with a heavy shawl that concealed most of their features. The outfit he had received, though, had been baggy silky pants that went down to his shins and shoes to match. That was what the other men had received, but they also had silky vests as well. Luffy had also gotten an open cloak that had a hood in order to cover up his face. No shirt, through which he found odd. Alvida had given him a weird smile, though, when she handed him the clothes, so maybe she had lost it and just didn't want to say anything. When the rest of them grouped up, he brought this up with Alvida. "Why does everyone else have a shirt except me?" Luffy asked, displaying his outfit. Alvida took a moment to think about an answer, while some of other girls looked at Luffy in surprise. "Well, you see," Alvida began as she noticed Nami glaring at her. "Well, Captain, you normally wear a vest, so if we had given you one as well, then people might have made the connection." "Right, Alvida," Robin said with a smirk. Alvida grinned. "Right, exactly so, Robin." She nodded back at her captain. "Oh, that makes a lot of sense," Luffy said, nodding back. That was a good point. No shirt would probably make him harder to recognize. His crew was always thinking ahead on stuff like that. He was lucky to have them. Alvida just smiled as Robin chuckled lightly. It seemed Alvida had an ally now when it came to her selecting Luffy's state of dress, or undress in this case. Nami glared between the two. It seemed that she would have to keep an eye on both of them now to protect her Luff captain. Nami was a little embarrassed at the slip-up even if it was just a thought. Shaking her head, Nami got more to the matter on hand. Alright, what should we do from here, Luffy? Should we look for your brother for a while before we split up and leave the city? Luffy thought about that for a second before saying, first let's find that bean restaurant I mentioned. If he's there then we won't need to look for him. But if he isn't, how about we split up into small groups and look for him? If we don't find him by noon, we meet back up at the restaurant and then we leave town. As much as I want to see him again, I can't say for sure if he is even here, so we won't stick around for longer than that. Luffy looked around at his crew to see what they thought. That sounded like a good plan to everyone. Everyone nodded their heads as they looked at their nakama. It seemed they were in agreement. So the group left the abandoned building and started to look for the restaurant. Do you know of a restaurant near here called Bean Something? Luffy asked some civilians he passed. Bean Something. The guy responded before realizing what the man likely meant. Do you mean the spicy bean? It's 2 streets over and up a ways. You can't miss it, and it'll be on the right. Luffy thanked the man and the crew headed in the way the man had sent them and soon came across the domed restaurant. Walking in, Luffy noticed some people look up from their meals before ignoring them again. Looking around, he didn't see his brother anywhere unfortunately, so he headed back outside. No luck, he said to his crew, who then split up into pairs ready to look around the city. Chopper, being the odd one out, joined Luffy and Robin. So my brother wears an orange hat that has 2 symbols on it shaped like a smiling and a frowning face. Not only that, but he has a big tattoo on his back of the Whitebeard's insignia and one on his arm that spells Ace with an S that is crossed out between the A and C. Luffy told everyone so they would know who to look for. Also, if he asks if we got the message about him waiting here, just say that we did. Last time he told someone that he would be waiting at Alabasta, so he shouldn't find it too surprising if we are looking for him. Luffy headed out with Robin and Chopper as the rest went their own ways. Hopefully, they would find him before noon, provided he was actually still here. If Ace never arrived in Alabasta, he could only hope that he wouldn't go after Blackbeard before they ran into each other again. Nami and Alvida had been paired up and were currently helping search the city. Nami was still annoyed at what Alvida had done with Luffy's shirt. She knew she had picked out one for him, but Alvida must have done something with it. Alvida better not have thrown it away and wasted some of her hard-earned money. That was worse than just messing with Luffy, in her opinion. Are you mad at me, Nami? Alvida asked, noticing how quiet the Straw Hat Navigator had been. Nami looked at her for a second before beginning to look for Ace again. What did you do with that shirt I bought for Luffy? Oh, I snuck it into my pack. Don't worry, I didn't throw it away if that's what you're worried about, Alvida said, laughing. Nami didn't say anything and decided to let the matter slide. Since she hadn't wasted the money, it hadn't been too bad. After all, seeing Luffy in just the shorts and cloak had been nice. Not that she would ever admit that out loud. Alvida, however, had noticed an orange hat sticking out in the crowd ahead of them. Nami, do you think that could be Ace? She said, pointing out the hat. Nami looked over, and while they couldn't see the rest of the person yet, figured it was likely. Not many people in Alabasta wore cowboy hats, let alone orange ones. Soon they found themselves standing in front of a man who was looking over some cooking food on one of the food stands. Drool was starting to come from his mouth as he took in the smells. This has to be him. Both Nami and Alvida thought, amused at how much the man currently resembled their own captain when food was in the room. Sure enough, he had the tattoo and clothing that Luffy had described as well. Ace, Nami called out tentatively as the man jerked out of his daydream and turned around to the woman who had called his name. 2 women, he realized as both were looking at him. Yes, he said, confused at how these 2 had known his name. We've been looking for you. We're with your brother Luffy, Alvida said to the man in front of them. At the name of his brother, Ace's expression turned into a smile. Luffy, wait, you're with my brother, as in you're both dating him, he yelled in surprise. His little brother must have grown up a lot more than he had imagined if he was dating women like the ones in front of him. That's not what she meant, Nami shouted in surprise, and at the same time, Alvida said, here's hoping, while crossing her fingers with a smile. We are a part of his crew, not his girlfriends, Nami said, explaining while glaring at Alvida. Honestly, just what kind of an idiot was Luffy's brother to think I'd share him? She thought, not quite realizing exactly what she had admitted to herself. Oh, that makes a lot more sense, Ace said, shaking his head. Honestly, the idea that Luffy could get a steady girlfriend, let alone 2 before he had, was ridiculous. Though then he remembered at what the woman with the mace had said and realized that maybe his brother was closer than he thought. You must have gotten my message then, Ace said, and the 2 women nodded their heads to confirm his suspicion. So where is my kid brother then? Ace said happily. It had been years since he had seen him, but he had tried to keep up with his brother's progress as Luffy's bounty had continued to increase steadily. Right now he was pretty sure it had hit 100 million berries, which was quite impressive for someone who had only just made it to the Grand Line. Just follow us. It's almost noon and we've already got a meeting place in mind. It's a restaurant named Spicy Bean, Nami explained as she began walking in the direction of the restaurant. The other 2 followed after her. So tell me about my brother and his crew. Ace said as he walked with the two women. He was curious as to just how strong his brother had gotten since he left. Right now we have about 10 members. Though we have been sailing with an 11th, she is just a temporary straw hat, Nami explained. By the way, my name is Alvida and she is Nami, our navigator. Alvida introduced themselves to Ace. Nice to meet you too. And my full name is Porcas d'Ace in case Luffy didn't tell you. Ace introduced himself. So how strong would you say your crew is overall? Who's the toughest? Ace asked, interested in who made up his brother's crew. Well, excluding Luffy, it would probably be between Robin, Zoro, Sanji, and maybe Alvida here, Nami said, though she was loath to admit that to the woman's face. Alvida grinned as she noticed the sour expression that had shown on her Nakama's face as Nami had said her name. Don't sell yourself short, Nami. Just because you're not the strongest doesn't mean you aren't one of the most important. I find it hard to believe Luffy would have made it to the Grand Line if it wasn't for your navigational skills, Alvida said. She figured if the woman was going to admit she was strong, Alvida could at least throw a bone her way. Nami looked at Alvida in surprise. She hadn't expected her to actually speak up for her in such a way. Well, that is true. I am not sure Luffy could even read a map if he wanted to, Nami said, smiling at Alvida. Ace laughed at that. Now that sounded like the brother he knew. Well, I'm glad to hear my brother seems to have a good crew if the two of you are any judge of character, Ace said to the two. Thinking more about Luffy, he was glad to see that he seemed to be the pirate captain he had always wanted to be. Ace had given that up when he had joined Whitebeard. Not that he had any regrets on that, but it was good to see his brother achieving his dream. Soon enough they found themselves standing in front of the restaurant again, though they were the first ones to arrive. Sitting down at one of the tables, the three resolved to wait for the rest of their nakama. Elsewhere, Luffy and Robin were walking down one of the streets in town looking for Ace. Chopper, having nearly succumbed to the heat, was riding on Luffy's shoulders as he used his ice powers to keep them cool. So Robin, do you think Crocodile will change much of his plan now that you are no longer working for him? Luffy asked as they walked. Robin thought about this for a while. I don't doubt it will cause some change, just so I can't possibly disrupt plans I am already aware of. I am unsure what that means for the overall plan though. If he thinks or knows we are alive, he may put off his plans in order to deal with us first. Robin then looked at Luffy and shrugged, though he could also put his plan in motion ahead of schedule to keep us from getting involved. Although since no one in this town seems to be panicked, no war has broken out yet at least. Since Crocodile no longer has a way of translating the poneglyph, what do you think he will do now? Is there another way he could translate them? Luffy asked. There is no one alive I am aware of who can translate them besides myself. So either Crocodile will think that the king has the knowledge he needs, or he will have to find some other way to find it, Robin said. Luffy nodded as he thought about that. So it seemed that Crocodile still had a reason to enact his plan to take control of the country. Although without the ability to read the poneglyph itself, his grand plan was doomed to fail. Crocodile was smart and devious though. There was no way the man would let his plan fall apart now if he could help it. Luffy couldn't help but worry what that might mean for them this time around. Drum Island had already shown him just how much things could change without him even stepping foot on the island. So just what could change this time? Luffy was broken out of his musing though when Robin noticed the time. Luffy, it's time we should head back to the restaurant. Hopefully one of the other groups found your brother. Luffy nodded at that and the three headed back towards the restaurant. Luffy couldn't help but worry that his brother might not be here. This had been the last place he had seen him before he had been arrested. And if he wasn't here now, then he worried what that might mean for the future. Luffy was surprised to feel a soft hand grip his shoulder as he looked over to see Robin looking at him in concern. There is no point worrying now, Captain. I am sure it will turn out all right. After all, one of the others could have found him already and are just waiting for us to get back, Robin said, trying to comfort Luffy. Luffy smiled at her and said, You're right, Robin. I am sure it will be fine. Robin smiled back and let go of his shoulder. It wasn't long before the three were standing in front of the restaurant. As they walked into the restaurant, they looked around at all their crew who were waiting for them. Luffy locked eyes with the one he was looking for and his face broke out in a large grin. Ace, it's been a while, Luffy said as he looked at his older brother. Ace smiled back and looked at his brother. His smile dropped, however, as he noticed the large scar that crossed his chest. Luffy, what the hell happened to you? The Straw Hats looked on in apprehension at Ace's question. It seemed he had most certainly noticed the difference with his brother. Alvida couldn't help but feel a little guilty that she was part of the reason Ace had noticed the scar, seeing as she had hidden Luffy's shirt from him. Luffy, suddenly realizing it might have been a better idea to cover his scar, scratched his head, trying to thinking of a good answer. Well, it's nothing to worry about really. I got this a few years ago in a fight, but who cares about that? It's good to see you, Ace, Luffy exclaimed, trying to change the subject. Ace shrugged and smiled back at his brother. It's been too long, lil bro, but maybe I can't call you that anymore. You are almost as tall as me now. Ace laughed as he noticed that his brother only stood a centimeter or two shorter than him now. Yeah, guess I hit a growth spurt while you were gone, Ace. It has been 3 years after all. Luffy said, hoping that Ace wouldn't notice that he might look a little older than he should be. As far as Ace knew, Luffy should be 19 right now, but in actuality, Luffy and Ace were about the same age now, give or take a few months. Yeah, must be, Ace said, looking over his brother. Anyway, it's good to see you, Luffy. I've met a lot of your crew here and it seems like you've got yourself a good group here. I'm proud of you. It seems you've grown quite strong in my absence, though I doubt you could take me on, Ace said, smirking carefully. At this, most of Luffy's crew snickered, causing Ace to look around. Oh, come on now, just because he's your captain doesn't mean he can take on his big brother. I've never once lost to Luffy, and I sure wouldn't now. Ace lit a fire with one of his fingers and said, I've eaten the flame fruit. I bet you can't even touch me, Ace said confidently with a smirk. Luffy gave a snicker of his own before infusing his finger with armament haki and flicking his brother in the forehead, causing his brother to yelp in surprise. Well, brother, it seems you are full of surprises. Where exactly did you learn to use haki? Ace said, rubbing his forehead. I've picked a few things up in our travels, Luffy said, smiling. Fair enough. Say, how about the two of us spar if you think you're so confident in your abilities? Ace said, looking at his brother. Luffy shook his head and said, sorry, Ace, but right now we have more important things to do. You ever hear of a man named Crocodile? The warlord? Ace asked curiously. I know he's set up shop here, but other than that I don't know much about him. Why? Well, it looks like he's running an organization that is trying to drive this country into a revolution, Luffy said before nodding in Vivi's direction. She is this country's princess and we decided to help her out. I'm going to go fight the guy while most of my crew tries to stop the revolution from happening. Well, that does sound like quite an adventure. I'd help you out, but unfortunately, right now I am on the hunt for a different man, Ace said. Oh yeah, who are you looking for? Luffy asked, although he already knew the answer. Well, I'm looking for a man named Blackbeard. I figured though since you were coming through this part of the Grand Line I'd stick around to say hello, Ace explained. I heard about Blackbeard. Luffy began explaining as he thought of the best way to put his plan. I hear that guy's been looking for me actually. Something about trying to turn in my bounty so he can become a warlord himself. Luffy said. Really? Blackbeard is after you, you say? Ace said, thinking about that. Yeah, I think I remember something about his whereabouts, Luffy said, pretending to think about his location. Wait, really? You have to tell me where he is then, Ace said excitedly. Nope, Luffy said, smirking. What? Come on, Luffy, be serious here, Ace said, exasperated. Sometimes his brother could be awfully childish. It seems that was something he had yet to grow out of. I'll make you a deal. If you help us save this country, then I'll help you take down Blackbeard. Deal? Luffy said, holding out his hand. Ace considered it for a while before shaking his head and saying, Look, Luffy, I don't have time to stick around here. If you know where he, just tell me. Sorry, Ace. I've been hearing about Blackbeard for a while and I want to fight him myself. So you can either come with us or you can try and find him on your own, Luffy said, crossing his arms over his chest. Ace thought some more about his deal. If it was true that Blackbeard was after his brother, then that meant Luffy might run into him first even if he went off and looked for him now. Blackbeard with his new devil fruit would be way too strong for Luffy's crew to take on. That could be a death sentence for them. Ace sighed as he made up his mind. Alright, Luffy, you win. You better not be yanking my chain though. If I find out that you dragged me along just to hang out more, I am going to be pissed, Ace said, looking at his brother seriously. I know, don't worry about it, Luffy said placatingly. I wouldn't lie to you about this. I know Blackbeard is a bad guy. I heard about how he betrayed your crew, and I can understand why you want to go after him. Ace looked at his brother and finally smiled again. Alright, Luffy, I believe you. Sorry to get so serious about all this, but I've been looking for him for a long time now. So if you say you know where he is, then I will help you all out. Ace looked around at the other Straw Hats before saying, So what's the plan here then? How are we going to take down Crocodile? Vivi stepped forward and began to lay out their plan. Luffy and Robin will be heading to fight Crocodile while the rest of us will be heading to the rebels' base. As far as we know, the rebels are currently holed up in Kataria, the town closest to here. Hopefully, we can convince the Koza and the rebels to hold off their attack while Luffy defeats Crocodile, Vivi said. Ace nodded at that. Well, do you want me to come with you, Luffy, or would you rather I help look after your crew? How about you come with me, Ace? Gives us some time to catch up, Luffy said with a smile. Alright then, well, Ace began to say before he was interrupted by the sounds of a crowd forming outside. Before they had any time to wonder what was going on, a man burst into the restaurant. The royal army, the man began while breathing hard. They're moving towards Kataria. Vivi looked alarmed as the rest of the Straw Hats looked around at one another. How could my father order something like that? Vivi said to herself in disbelief. She refused to believe that her father would order an attack on their own people, so what was his plan? Luffy thought about it for a moment before realizing what might have happened. Mr. 2 might have replaced your father. Vivi had a look of realization come over her as she stood up. Then we have no time to lose, she said as she looked towards the others. Robin, Ace, come with me. The rest of you help Vivi. We will meet you at the Kateria or the capital if we don't find you there. Luffy gave his orders as everyone got to their feet. They all moved for the door ready for whatever happened next. The war for Alabasta's future had begun. On a marine ship on the Grand Line. What's the deal here, Sengoku? Why was I ordered to head to some desert island in paradise? Some rookie starting trouble? Garp yelled into his transponder snail. Don't give me that. You can thank your grandson for your detour. Sengoku yelled back. Hey, Luffy, what's he got up to now? Garp asked. Captain Smoker has been sending in reports of his activity, but they went silent a few days ago. He was onto something big, and HQ is worried we might have a large scandal on our hands if we don't get a handle on this situation. Sengoku began to explain. What's this got to do with Luffy? Garp asked. Last he had heard the world government had adopted a wait-and-see approach when it came to Luffy. So what had happened to change that? Well, Smoker intercepted a call that came in from the criminal organization known as Baroque Works. It operates mainly in Paradise, but has been known to recruit members from all 4 seas. Sengoku continued. This call was between a high-ranking member of that organization and its leader. In it, the agent in question claimed to have killed the Straw Hats and captured the Princess of Alabasta. At this, Garp grew concerned for obvious reasons, but before he could interject, Sengoku put his mind at ease. Now we have since determined that was a lie. Smoker managed to capture the agent named Galdino, or Mr. 3 as he is known in the organization. It seems the Straw Hats defeated him and he was forced into supplying his boss without that falsified report. Sengoku finished. Well, alright then, so why have I been sent out here then? Why not send the local Marines to investigate instead of me? Garp asked. I was getting to that. In Smoker's investigation, it was uncovered that the leader of this organization is none other than the warlord Crocodile. It seems that for whatever reason Crocodile is fueling the local rebellion in order to get himself on the throne. Really now? That won't look good for the world government if everyone learned a government-sanctioned pirate was attempting a coup on one of its members. Garp said, beginning to see why he would be sent out here. Exactly. Now it seems that the Straw Hats have somehow gotten involved in this. We aren't sure how, but as it is, the Straw Hats have been aiding the princess return to her island. Their exact motives are unclear, but as it is, they have put themselves in the warpath with Crocodile. Sengoku never liked the warlords much, but they were a necessary evil sometimes. When it came down to it, they were a useful deterrent against rookie pirates. Crocodile going rogue only served to deepen his dislike of the warlords. If this situation wasn't handled carefully, then a lot of people could lose faith in the world government. If that happened, it would only serve to increase support for the Revolutionary Army. That was something that could not happen, which is why he had come up with a plan to minimize any possible consequences that should come from Crocodile's defection. Now last we heard from Smoker, he was planning on infiltrating Crocodile's base of operations. Since then we have received no reports, so it assumed he has either been captured or killed. So what are my orders then? Garp asked. Your orders are to head to Alabasta and put an end to Crocodile's plan, and rescue Captain Smoker should he be alive. If this means aiding the Straw Hats, then that is what you will have to do. Aiding the Straw Hats. It may be my grandson's crew, but are you sure that is wise? Garp asked, confused. Not that he would have attacked his grandson, but it was a surprise to be ordered to aid pirates. Yes, that's right, Sengoku said before explaining his reasoning. Garp's eyes widened in realization. Luffy wasn't going to like this, he laughed to himself. As the call ended, Garp stepped out on deck and began to bark orders at his crew. He smiled as he thought about Luffy. It seems like it was going to be time for a family reunion. His grandson was going to have a lot to explain when he got his hands on him. In the capital, Karu had finally managed to get his message to the king. Shaka, looking towards his king, asked, "What has Vivi reported, your highness?" King Nefertari Cobra looked over the report before smiling. "Excellent, Karu. You have done well getting this report to me. You should get back to Vivi now and aid her in her quest," Cobra said, giving a fond smile towards the bird. Karu gave a quick salute with his wing before leaving the room. Unknown to Karu was the 2 Baroque agents waiting to kidnap the animal once he was out of earshot of the royal chambers. Shaka watched as his king turned his direction. "It seems I was right to listen to my head guards," Cobra said, looking at Shaka. "What did Vivi have to say?" Shaka asked, confused at his response. "It seems the rebels are the ones who are behind Baroque Works. Koza, the young boy who used to be friends with Vivi, was jealous of her position and coveted power for himself," Mr. 2 said as he tucked the real report into his robes. "Koza, how could he do something like this? I assumed that he was only misguided, but to hear that he is behind not only the rebellion but Baroque Works as well, that is troubling," Shaka said, shaking his head in disappointment. To hear that the boy that had once been a good and loyal friend to Vivi now dealt in subterfuge and deceit to claim the royal throne for himself was almost too hard to believe. "Yes, it is," Mr. 2 said. "It was most unfortunate that we must fight our own people, but if they are truly at the root of this country's problem, then we have no choice, I am afraid. I am glad I listened to you and Pell in the end," while Mr. 2 was presenting a saddened king. who was doing his duty. On the inside he was gleeful. When he had taken Cobra's form, it was intended that he would slowly bring his subordinates around to the idea of attacking the rebels directly. So it had been to his great surprise when it was, in fact, they who advised him on the attack. All he had to do was appear to be troubled by the idea and hesitantly agree in the end. They had bought his disguise and were now implementing some of the final stages of Baroque Works' grand plan. Mr. 2 was surprised when Crocodile had decided to work against the rebels. After all, it had been Baroque Works who had slowly helped build the rebellion from the very beginning. It seems Miss All Sunday's defection had caused a disturbance in a great many plans, though. In the end, it was decided that Crocodile would take control of the royal palace in secret. All it would take was the imprisonment of the king and the defeat of the rebels. When they managed to get their hands on Vivi, they could force her to work as their puppet. With her father in prison, she would have no other choice. Mr. 2 would continue to impersonate the king while the real king would be held hostage to force compliance among the highest-ranking officials in the palace. Those who refused would be quietly replaced with Baroque Works members. In the background, Crocodile would be the puppet master of the entire kingdom. Using its resources, he would accomplish his ultimate goal in locating Pluton. When Mr. Zero had called all of his top agents together, they had all been surprised to see it was none other than Crocodile, the hero of this country that was the one responsible for Baroque Works. Crocodile had then shared with the rest the betrayal of his top agent Miss All Sunday to the rest of them. Then he gave them their newest orders and described how they would all be in positions of great power soon enough. Mr. 2 would be acting king until Crocodile managed to get his hands on Pluton. Until then they would have to keep up the pretense of the royal family being in charge still. If they didn't, the world government would bring its justice down on Baroque Works. The very idea of a warlord taking control of a member of the world government would be an embarrassment to them and would have to be rectified immediately if they wanted to save face. So until Pluton was safely in their control, Mr. 2 would have to keep pretending to be king. Mr. 2 looked out the window of his royal quarters as he watched the royal army march into the distance. He was pretty sure he could get used to being royalty. If only he didn't have to keep up this ridiculous disguise while he did so. Luffy, Ace, and Robin were currently standing on the banks of the Sandor River. I told you, Luffy, we should have gone back for a ship. What was your plan anyway? None of us can swim. Ace said, arms folded across his chest. Luffy stood on the edge of the water looking across. He had never tried to freeze something this large, but it shouldn't be too hard. Luffy stuck his hand into the water and began to freeze a path across the river. Ace watched in amazement, wondering just how his brother was managing this. Luffy, is this a devil fruit power? What happened to your gum fruit? Ace asked, confused at the change in powers. I lost it, Ace. In return, I got a new devil fruit, so I would consider it a fair trade. Let's get going though, we don't have time to waste. Luffy replied as he stepped out onto the ice, followed closely by Robin. Ace watched as his brother and crewmate stepped out onto the ice and began to cross the river. Just what happened to you, Luffy? Ace thought to himself as he stepped out onto the ice. It seemed sturdy enough, so he sped up to catch up to the other two. It seemed his brother held a lot of secrets nowadays. New powers, and that fierce burn across his chest. What was Luffy going to throw at him next? So where is this crocodile guy anyway? Ace asked, seeing as how Luffy didn't seem to want to talk about his past much, he might as well ask about their current plans. Robin answered, saying, his base of operations is underneath the casino he runs in Rainbase. As long as he hasn't changed his plans too much, he will likely stay there until he can take over the capital. Alright, and just how do you guys know so much about his organization's plans? Crocodile, not any good at keeping secrets or something? Ace asked. Luffy was trying to think of a way of answering that wouldn't reveal too much when Robin responded. I used to be his second in command, and was involved in most of the plans up until I abandoned him. I see, Ace said, surprised at Robin's answer. So if you used to work for him, how did you manage to join up with Luffy here? No offense to Luffy, but it seems a bit odd to betray a warlord for a rookie. Robin, looking to Luffy, smiled a little as she answered. Well, we ran into each other not too long after he arrived on the Grand Line. Luffy just had a way with words, I guess, that made me want to take a chance with his crew. Since then, I would say that was the best decision I could have ever made. Ace looked between the two. It seemed something unspoken passed between the two, but he was at a loss as to what that was. Even though it means you will have to fight your old boss. The only reason I followed Crocodile was that he was a means to accomplish my goal. He wanted me to read the Poneglyph that is hidden on this island, and I wanted to uncover it as well. Robin paused before continuing. That is where our goals diverge, however. Crocodile wanted me to reveal the location of Pluton, which should be transcribed on the Poneglyph, while I would have refused to divulge that information. Ace was surprised to hear of someone who could read the Poneglyph. He knew that they were forbidden by the world government, but he didn't know much more than that. So what exactly is Pluton, and why does Crocodile want to get his hands on it? Ace asked. Pluton is an ancient weapon that supposedly was strong enough to wipe out entire islands. Now I am unsure if this knowledge is actually on this Ponjolf, but Crocodile was convinced of it. Using Pluton, Crocodile hoped to amass enough power to rival the world government. Ace definitely hadn't seen that coming. So while I admit my knowledge of the Ponjolfs is limited, I know at least that almost no one is still around who can read them. What's Crocodile going to do now that you won't be there to read it for him? That I do not know. His plan may be to try and recruit me back if possible, though that plan wouldn't work. Maybe he thinks that the royal family may have some other way of finding the weapon even if he can't read the Poneglyph. Ace nodded his head in acknowledgement. To think that there was power out there that could destroy an entire island. He didn't like the idea of someone like Crocodile having his hands on such a weapon. Even if his first enemy was the world government, it wouldn't be long before he would turn his sights on groups like the Whitebeards with such a weapon under his control. Maybe it was a good idea to go with Luffy after all. Even if Luffy had held the whereabouts of Blackbeard hostage for that to happen. Soon enough, the two Straw Hats and Ace found themselves on the far side of the river. As they got back on dry land, Luffy turned around and melted the ice he had created. So Luffy, we have a long trek in front of us. How about you start telling me about just where you got this new devil fruit of yours? Ace asked his brother. If there was one thing that Ace knew about devil fruits was that you only got one and they stayed with you until death. So just how had Luffy gotten a hold of this new power when he had already eaten a devil fruit in his youth? Luffy was silent for a moment, mulling over his answer. Finally, with a sigh, he began explaining what he could without revealing too much. A few months ago, I ran into a man that saved my life. He wouldn't tell me his name, but he offered me a way to become stronger than before. Luffy said, he gave me a new devil fruit and took away my old one. And before you ask, I don't know how he could do that. I don't know much about how he did anything he showed me. Ace looked at Luffy a little worried about what he heard. A mysterious man who somehow had the ability to take away devil fruits was something he had never heard of before. Could it have been a devil fruit of his own that gave him that ability? It was the only explanation that Ace could think of that made any sense. So you actually got an entirely new devil fruit, eh? So is it a Paramecia devil fruit or is it a Loja type? Ace asked. Loja, Luffy said before demonstrating the ability by turning his arms into magma and ice respectively. Two types, Ace exclaimed in surprise. But that should be impossible. Yeah, the guy said he fused two different fruits together to get this one. It's now the Icy-Mag Fruit. It gives me the ability to transform into and control magma and ice. Ace whistled through his teeth at the knowledge of something that powerful. Just how had his kid brother gotten such a strong devil fruit? Such a thing as two devil fruits in one just seemed impossible. Well, Luffy, maybe you could give me a run for my money. How about when all this is over we have a friendly spar just like the old days? Could be pretty interesting to see if you could have gotten tough enough to take me on yet. Ace said, smirking at Luffy. Luffy laughed at that and patted his brother on the back. Sounds good, bro. When all this stuff is over, I can kick your ass if you want. Like how you'd win, Luffy. Don't forget who's never once won a fight against me when we were younger. Just because you've picked up some flashy tricks since then doesn't mean you've gotten stronger than me. Ace said irritably. Luffy just laughed again at his brother, which only served to irritate Ace even more. As the two brothers argued, Robin chose to sit back and watch in amusement. Now that she knew Luffy's past, she hoped that Luffy would have more time to spend with his brother. From what little she knew, it seemed that he really hadn't seen much of Ace since the two had left their home island. The last time being Ace's unfortunate demise, so she was content to just let the two reconnect after a long time apart. Her captain deserved it. Back on the other side of the river, the rest of the Straw Hats were planning with Vivi on where to go first. So do you think we should go to the capital first in order to stop the attack, or should we head towards the rebels? Nami asked the princess. Vivi thought carefully on her options. As it seemed that the royal army was the one was going to strike first, so if she wanted to prevent a conflict she would need to stop their advance. I think we need to find Chaka or Pell first. They will be the ones to talk to if we want to stop the attack. At least one of them should be marching with the army itself, so we should head there first, Vivi said to her nakama. The rest of the Straw Hats nodded, and they continued their way out of the city. Do you think Kara will be alright if he's heading for the capital? If your father has been replaced, then won't he be walking into a trap? Nijiko asked. I don't know, Vivi said worriedly. I can only hope that he gives the report to someone other than the imposter. Well, the imposter will have to act like your father to keep up the pretense, right? If other people are around, there would be no way he could hurt Kara without raising some suspicion from the people close to him. Alvida suggested. I hope you're right. Right now we can't afford to go there until we stop the attack from happening. Vivi replied. Maybe we should split up then. If some of us go straight to the capital, maybe we can keep an eye on things while the rest of you meet with the royal army. Nami said. If you write a letter, maybe we can try and keep the imposter from doing anything too drastic. Zoro was standing off to the side looking out into the desert. Hand on his hilt, he looked towards Vivi. So who do you want to go with you? And who should continue on to the capital then? Vivi stood for a moment and thought about that. For whatever reason, Crocodile seemed to be intent on taking control of her country. Right now he had likely replaced her own father with Mr. 2. And that meant he needed to ensure that Rouse held up so he could continue that deception. At the same time, Crocodile had ordered the royal army to attack the rebels, which was something her father would never willingly do. To directly harm their own people was something she refused to believe her father would be capable. The people of Alabasta might not see it that way though. For years, Crocodile had been spreading misinformation to create this uprising in her country. So why would he order an attack on the rebel army unless it was to create more dissent among her people? Vivi was broken out of her musing by a gentle hand on her shoulder. Vivi, Nami said, concerned for her friend. Their plan seems to entirely hinge on this battle happening, though, so I would imagine that most agents will be diverted here to ensure this battle happens, Vivi said, thinking out loud. With all the wounded that might be coming, I think it would be for the best if Chopper and Kaya came with me. If we can't stop the battle in time, then at least we can help those in need. Chopper and Kaya agreed with that idea. A doctor's place was wherever people needed them most. Hopefully, their skills wouldn't be required too much though. As for the rest of you, I am not entirely sure. Who wants to go where? Vivi asked, looking to her Nakama. If she were right, then most of them would be needed at the battlefield. But with Mr. 2 at the capital and whoever else might be there to stop them, they couldn't risk sending only one person. Whatever they decided, it needed to be done quickly. Too much was on the line to dawdle now. Luffy, Ace, and Robin were still making their way through the desert. Just how far is this city anyway? Ace asked his traveling companions. When he had initially signed up for this little adventure, he hadn't realized just how long this trek through the desert would take. We should reach the city's outskirts close to sunset as long as we keep moving, Robin replied back. Unfortunately for her, with her leaving the organization, she no longer had access to the F-20, which would have made this journey much faster. Luffy was also starting to get bored. He was beginning to remember just how much traveling through the desert he had done on his first journey, and it was starting to bore him now. Taking a long sip from his flask, he turned to Ace. Looking at his brother, it seemed weird to see him walking beside him once more. It occurred to Luffy just how much he didn't know about his brother's adventures since he had seen him last. He knew that Ace at one point had decided to sail under Whitebeard instead of his own, but he had no clue why. Ace, what made you join Whitebeard anyway? I thought you wanted to have your own crew, Luffy asked. Well, I did for a long time. And in fact, we are all Whitebeard pirates now. I was captain of the Spade Pirates all the way until the New World, which is where I eventually joined Whitebeard. Though I admit, I didn't join easily, Ace admitted, thinking back on his many assassination attempts against Whitebeard. So how did that happen? Luffy asked. He couldn't imagine himself willing to sail under someone else's flag, so the fact his brother had intrigued him. Robin was curious just how Ace had managed to join the man who was heralded as the strongest of the four emperors as well. Well, that's an interesting story actually. You see, once upon a time I tried to kill Whitebeard. Ace began laughing about the event now. Wait, really? So just how did you go from wanting to kill him to join him? Luffy asked curiously. I was a naive pirate fresh in the New World. I thought if I could take down the strongest man, then I would be able to prove myself, Ace said, smiling, thinking about his days with the Spade Pirates. It turns out one of the warlords didn't like that some rookie was trying to challenge Whitebeard, and thought to challenge me himself. You fought one of the other warlords? Robin asked before adding, which one? Jin, the only Fishman warlord. Turns out he looked up to Whitebeard since he declared Fishman Island under his protection. So to keep the old man from wasting his time with me, Jin decided to fight me himself. Ace laughed again. Really, you fought Jin? Luffy said, surprised. He had never known that before. Yeah, you know him or something? Ace asked, a little confused as to the way Luffy asked that. No, of course not. Just thought it was surprising you fought a warlord, that's all, Luffy said a little nervously. Ace looked at his brother curiously before giving a shrug. Anyway, we ended up fighting for 5 days before we both collapsed from exhaustion, Ace said, continuing his story. After that, Whitebeard himself showed up and challenged me. I put up a wall of fire to protect my crew while they escaped, and I fought Whitebeard myself. Although the fight didn't last long, I'd like to say it was because I was exhausted. But really, there is a reason Whitebeard is said to be the strongest, Ace said, thinking back on all the attempts he had made on Whitebeard's life. So how did you go from fighting to becoming one of his crew? Luffy asked. After our fight, he told me to become one of his sons, which of course pissed me off to no end at first. But eventually I came around to the idea, and I got this tattoo on my back to symbolize my change of heart, Ace said, pointing to his back. In fact, the rest of the Spade Pirates joined too, and after a while, I eventually became the 2nd Division commander, Ace said, smiling back at his promotion, though the smile dropped from his face as he remembered who had given him support in becoming the commander. Blackbeard himself had said he should go for it despite the fact he had been a part of the crew for much longer. Eventually, one of the men under my command, Blackbeard, betrayed us. He killed one of the other division commanders to get the devil fruit he found. Thatch, who was one of my closest friends, was murdered just so Blackbeard could gain the powers of some devil fruit, Ace said, gritting his teeth. Luffy couldn't help but think how it wasn't just any devil fruit that he had stolen, but an extremely powerful one that would eventually bring him to the title of Emperor, replacing Whitebeard. That reminds me, Luffy, why exactly is Blackbeard after you again? Ace asked. He thought it was odd that Blackbeard would be after his brother. Ace couldn't help but wonder if it had anything to do with their relationship, though he had no clue as to how Blackbeard would have learned of it. He's just after my bounty as far as I know, Luffy explained, trying to omit anything that might point to his knowledge of the future. He's looking to become a warlord for some reason, and I guess he figures the best way to do that would be to turn in a strong rookie. My bounty is big enough that Blackbeard feels that he has a good shot at that, Luffy said. Ace scratched his chin thinking about that. It seemed odd that Blackbeard would want to become a warlord. He might have become a division commander if he had wanted it, but he always said it wasn't an ambition of his. So just why would he want to become a warlord then? Ace shook himself from those kinds of thoughts. Well, all right if you say so. I guess sailing with you for a bit won't be too bad, Ace said, trailing off as he smirked. Maybe I can show you a thing or two about being a pirate captain. Luffy smirked at that. I don't need anyone telling me how to be a captain. And shooting a sly glance at Ace said, certainly not from someone who isn't even a captain of his own ship. Robin laughed as Ace grew flustered. Hey, I sailed all the way to the New World with my own crew, rookie. Don't get all uppity because you think you're some hotshot. You aren't even to the halfway point on the weak side of the Grand Line. Ace replied back, annoyed at his brother's remark. Maybe, but I still bet I could kick your ass, Luffy replied, laughing again. Seeing both Robin and Luffy laughing at him at this point, Ace couldn't help but join in as well. You've somehow gotten even cockier since we parted, you know that, Ace said, laughing. How about you tell me some of your adventures then, hotshot? Ace said, looking between the two. Luffy quieted his laughing and began thinking back on what he could actually share with Ace. He decided if he just kept events to what had happened this time around, it should be safe enough as long as he kept the details to a minimum. So he began to tell Ace about his adventures since leaving Dawn Island, his fights with Buggy, Arlong and Don Krieg, and then eventually his time since he arrived on the Grand Line. Ace listened intently. It was sort of surprising to hear just how many pirate crews Luffy had taken down in his short time on the Grand Line. While he had certainly gotten into many scuffles in his time with the Spade Pirates, it seemed Luffy was intent on starting trouble wherever he went. Ace thought about something before giving a short laugh. He didn't believe Luffy would take to it, but it could never hurt to ask. Say, Luffy, when this is all over and we've taken down Blackbeard, why don't you and your crew join up with Whitebeard and me? I'm sure when the old man hears you helped me, he might even make you a division commander yourself if you prove yourself. So what do you say, Luffy? It could be a lot of fun sailing together, Ace said, smiling towards his brother. Luffy smirked, shaking his head. You'll never give up with that, will you? If I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times I am going to become the Pirate King. I can't do that sailing under Whitebeard, can I? Luffy said as he continued walking. Luffy hadn't noticed how Ace had stopped at his declaration, looking at Luffy in confusion. Eventually, Luffy saw how his brother had stopped and turned back towards his brother. What's wrong, Ace? You aren't really offended I won't join, are you? Luffy asked, confused at his brother's actions. Luffy, what are you talking about? Ace asked. That's the first time I've ever asked you to join. What? No, it's not. You asked me back in Nanohana, remember? Right after you. Luffy stopped cold. Right after Ace had helped him escape from Smoker, which had never happened this time around. Right after I what, Luffy? I never asked you to join up with Whitebeard, Ace asked, growing more concerned. Little things had been adding up here and there since he had met back up with his brother. He'd brushed off a lot of things since this was his family he was talking about, but maybe now was the time to confront him. Luffy was starting to backpedal. I guess you're right, that must have been someone else who asked me to join their crew. I was just confused, Ace, that's all. Luffy tried to explain away quickly. Luffy, how'd you get that scar? And how'd you get the new devil fruit? That was something you left out in your adventures since you left home. Seems like some pretty big events you left out, Ace asked, wondering just what his brother could possibly be hiding. Turning to Robin, he wasn't surprised to see she wasn't meeting his eye and instead turned to Luffy as if wondering what he would say. So it seems there was something. Luffy's crew seemed to know what it was at least. What could be such a big secret that his brother would lie to him about it? Luffy hadn't been prepared for this. Just what could he say now that could fix this? How could he have slipped up like this? He was usually so good about this kind of thing. Robin calmly reached out and laid a comforting hand on his shoulder. Looking at Robin, he could see what she was trying to say without saying it. Luffy sighed. Maybe it was for the best. Would his brother believe him though? Luffy, just what's going on here? Ace asked again. Luffy looked towards him and said, Ace, what if I told you that I've been through all this once before? Ace looked at him, his face screwed up in confusion. Just what does that mean, Luffy? You're not making sense here. Luffy let out a sigh. I'm from the future, Ace. They're gone, Vivi said, standing in the middle of an empty camp around Kataria. They must have left intending to meet the royal army head-on, Vivi, Nami said, looking around. From what she could see, it seemed they left in a hurry. Half-eaten meals and lit fires pointed to a hurried exit. Sanji and Alvida had been chosen to go ahead and head towards the capital while the rest stayed with Vivi. They figured 2 of the stronger members of the Straw Hats would be all that the capital would need, especially if Mr. 2 intended to keep up the deception of replacing the king. The rest of the Straw Hats would be needed to make sure that Vivi was able to stop the battle that was soon to take place. Well, we can't stick around then. If the 2 groups are closing in on each other, we need to be fast if we want to have any chance of stopping them, Najiko said, looking towards Vivi. Well, we can't have that, no way, no way. A shrill shout came from nearby. New came a slow drawl from the same direction. Vivi and the Straw Hats all looked towards the voices and were surprised to see 3 figures standing on the edges of the camp. You 2 be quiet. I have had enough of listening to your inane babble. A tall, muscular man with an open cloak and sash around his waist told the other 2. Just who are you guys? Baroque works, Usopp asked, lowering his goggles over his eyes with a shot loaded in his slingshot. Zoro had his hand on his sheath ready to draw when necessary. He observed the newcomers waiting for the attack that was sure to come. That is none of your concern, the man said, flexing his hands. If you leave now and let us take Vivi to her father, no one needs to be harmed. My father? Or do you mean the imposter you have at the capital? Vivi demanded. What? How does she know that? No way she figured it out that fast, no way. The short woman dressed all in green shouted. Miss Merry Christmas, what did I just say? If she wasn't sure of the deception before then, you have just confirmed it, Mr. 1 said, looking at the lower-ranked agent with a hint of anger. Miss Merry Christmas took a step back nervously. Sorry, I didn't mean to, you know that. No matter, Mr. 1 said, annoyed. Mr. 4 just watched with a blank expression, blinking slowly. If you will not willingly give us the princess, then Mr. 1 began as he launched himself towards the nearest Straw Hat. Nami raised her new climb attack to defend herself, but was glad to see Zoro standing before her, swords locked in the man's grasp. Mr. 1 was surprised to see his attack had been stopped. But as he studied the swordsman, he realized who he was dealing with. You are Roronoa Zoro, are you not? The one who killed Mr. 7. Mr. 1 said, testing the swordsman's strength by pushing his bladed hand against the swordsman's guard. Zoro pushed back just as hard as he grinned around his sword hilt. What's it to you? Zoro said. Nothing, just confirming a suspicion, Mr. 1 said as he launched his other hand towards the swordsman's gut, which was met by another blade. You are fast swordsman. However, no matter the skill you have, no swordsman could ever best me, Mr. 1 stated confidently. Why's that? Zoro gritted out as he fought against the Baroque agent's strength. My devil fruit allows me to completely transform any part of my body into a blade, so your swords will never be able to cut my steel, Mr. 1 said while beginning to take swipes with his hands and feet, intending to cut the swordsman who so far had managed to avoid any of his blows. Then I will just have to be able to cut steel then, won't I? Zoro said, continuing to block his attacks. Miss Merry Christmas gave a start as she realized that she should be attacking as well. Mr. 4, get to it. We have to capture the princess and kill the Straw Hats. Got it, got it, got it, Miss Merry Christmas yelled out to her partner. Mr. 4 just gave a slow nod and a slow grunt that might have sounded like an okay. Nami and Najiko stood before them ready to fight. Nami turned back towards the rest of the Straw Hats and Vivi, saying, You guys keep moving. We have things covered here. But Vivi started to protest as Najiko interrupted. What is the most important thing we need to do right now, princess? Najiko said. Vivi stopped to think before saying, To protect my people, she said, realizing what they were getting at. Exactly, Nami replied, so you 4 get moving. The rest of us have things covered here. With Nami and Najiko facing off with Mr. 4 and Miss Merry Christmas and Zoro with Mr. 1, they knew they could handle things here. Usopp, Chopper, and Kaya began to lead Vivi out of the camp. Mr. 1 attempted to follow but was stopped by Zoro. Your opponent right now is me. You don't have time for anything else, Zoro said, staring the assassin down. Mr. 1 glared at the swordsman before saying, Then I will just have to make this quick then. Vivi and the Straw Hats who were accompanying her left behind their nakama. Right now they had to stop the battle from happening. As much as they wanted to aid their friends, they were counting on them to continue on. The fate of Alabasta depended on them. Zoro continued to trade blows with Mr. 1 as Nami and Najik sized up their opponents. Mr. 4 seemed to have a giant cannon strapped to his back, but there was no telling what the powers of the smaller, older woman were. It didn't matter how strong they might be though. There was no other option than victory in this fight. Nami and Najiko shared a look as the sisters prepared for the fight ahead of them. So this is Rain Base A, Ace said, looking around the desert city. Around them was a city decorated in luxury. Being the only town which still regularly got rain, and its thriving gambling dens helped support this town's wealth. Ace was surprised to see a town like this considering the drought that everyone seemed to be experiencing in this country. So what exactly is our plan here, you two? We going to just waltz into his casino and demand to see the big man himself? Ace said, looking towards his traveling companions. That's simplifying things, but ultimately yes. Right now Crocodile can't afford to have us walking around in public potentially outing his plans to the entire country. So once we make our way into his casino, he won't hesitate to get us out of the public eye. Robin began to explain. Basically, we walk and kick Crocodile's ass and then we can get back to Vivi and the others. Luffy simplified. Robin laughed as Ace just shook his head at his kid brother's explanation. Guess that's as good a plan as any, Ace said before chuckling to himself. Unknown to the three, another group was tracking their progress through the city. Mr. Zero, they've arrived. Straw Hat, Miss All Sunday, and someone I don't recognize are all heading towards the casino. A frog-costumed woman reported into a transponder snail as her partner looked through a spyglass. Good. Now the two of you take an F-Wanny and get back towards the coming battleground. If those two have made it to Rain Base, then the others have to be on their way there, Crocodile said into his transponder. Right away, boss, Miss Father's Day said before the harsh click that came through signaled the end of their connection. That was rather rude, Mr. Seven said as he packed away his spyglass. That Croc is a real jerk. He better give us a promotion when this is all over, Miss Father's Day said. Or what? Mr. Seven said with a raised eyebrow. He's one of the 7 warlords. Neither of us could stand up to him in a fight, so just what are you going to do about it? Just whose side are you on anyway? Miss Father's Day said, annoyed. Let's just get going. Mr. Seven nodded his head, and the two left their vantage point before heading towards the corrals. It wouldn't be wise to disobey Crocodile. They would be dead before the end of the day if that ever happened. At the capital, Alvida and Sanji were currently running through the streets heading towards the palace. The place seemed oddly dead for what was the capital of one of the largest islands the two had ever laid eyes on. It seemed that most people were either in the battle or had fled, fearing what might come next if they stayed and the royal army lost. However, the two Straw Hats stopped their journey as they noticed a tall blue-haired woman sashaying towards them, hips swaying side to side. Sanji was immediately enthralled, and with heart shooting out of his eyes, he began drooling at the sight of the beautiful woman. That was until he felt the weight of Alvida's mace smack into the back of his head, sending him crashing to the ground. Hey, just what was that for? Sanji yelled back. Just get going to the capital, I've got this lady handled, Alvida said, smirking. How about you take the princess's note and I stay here and handle her, eh? Sanji said, holding out the piece of paper. Nice try, lover boy. How would Nijiko react if she saw you right now? Alvida said, chuckling to herself. She'd seen Nijiko's fury at Sanji's wandering eyes before, so she knew that should wake Sanji up. The gears in Sanji's head ground to a halt as he thought of the consequences before him. How about I keep going to the palace and you stay here and fight then? Sanji said nervously. That's a good idea, Sanji, Alvida said, smiling again. And you won't tell Nijiko any of this, will you? Sanji said as he began scooting away towards the palace. Maybe. Let's say you owe me a favor down the line, and I'll keep this under wraps. Sound good? Alvida said. Sanji was a little nervous at that, but he couldn't afford to have Nijiko mad at him again. Just what kind of favor? Does it matter? Alvida laughed. She knew she had Sanji over a barrel, so there was no way he could refuse her offer. All right, fine, Sanji said, beginning to run towards the capital. He yelled over his shoulder, just keep your side of the bargain. Alvida just continued to laugh as she faced off against the swaying woman. Don't you think you're overdoing it a bit? Alvida asked the woman. Just watching the way she swung her hips side to side hurt her back. How dare you? I'll have you know I turn plenty of guys' heads with this walk. Your companion sure seemed to like it, Miss Doublefinger said to the woman in front of her. I think a curvy piece of driftwood would catch that perv's eye, Alvida replied, enjoying the scowl that came over the woman's face. Whatever, I have a job to do, so why don't we make this quick so I can kill your friend as well? Miss Doublefinger said, raising her hands, readying herself for a fight. Fine with me, lady. I've got better things to do, Alvida said, lifting the mace up over her shoulder. Vivi was staring at the battle before her. It was too late to stop the fighting. The two armies had met out by one of the rocky outcroppings that dotted the desert, shading the soldiers and rebels in their fight. In front of her, two giant armies were clashing. Rebels and guards yelled out in fury and agony as men were cut down left and right, spilling blood onto the sand. In the mass confusion, it was impossible to tell where any leaders were in the chaos. Pell or Chaka could have been anywhere in the fight, and Koza would likely be right there on the front lines. How was she going to get their attention now? Looking out over the fight, the three Straw Hats were at a loss as to what to do now. Vivi, what should we do? Usopp asked, looking towards Vivi. Chopper and Kyle wanted to help where they could, but with the battle still raging, there was nowhere they could aid anyone until the fighting stopped. I have to stop them somehow, Vivi said as she strode towards the battlefield. They would listen to her even if she had to get into the thick of the battle to make them do it. As she got closer, she began to scream out, trying to get anyone to listen that she could. Please listen to me, Vivi tried, shouting over the sounds of battle. You are fighting the wrong enemy, please stop, she yelled again. A soldier or a rebel here and there seemed to perk up but were quickly drawn back to the fighting before she could get their attention. There was one though that met her gaze and smirked cruelly. Vivi noticed the symbol for Baroque work sewn into his uniform as he turned his gun onto the princess. Usopp noticed the gun being pointed at Vivi and snapped his slingshot back and fired off a shot. But he was too slow to stop the shot that rang out as he fired his own. The one who fired the bullet would be knocked unconscious, but it would do no good for Vivi as the ball flew right at her. Vivi flinched, closing her eyes, prepared for the hit that was about to come. But there was none to come. Vivi could hear the battle raging on, but no bullet pierced her flesh as she expected. Had the man missed? She wondered to herself as she slowly opened her eyes and was surprised to see a giant fist before her clenched as if grabbing something. Looking up, she was surprised to see a man tower over her in a marine uniform. He had gray hair and a goat and looked to be angry as he watched the battle before him. He opened up his hand as Vivi watched the bullet drop out of his hand. This man had caught the bullet out of thin air and saved her. Just who was this man? Raising his other fist, she saw it turn completely black before he brought his fist against the stone outcropping, causing a giant boom to ring out over the battlefield as everyone stopped for a moment, feeling the wave of power wash over them. The battle was bathed in light again as the setting sun was revealed behind the rocks that had once stood tall over the battlefield. In the momentary silence of the battle, the man shouted out over everyone, "I am Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp of the Marines, and I order you all to lay down your arms." The man identified himself to the surprised onlookers. The Straw Hats were stunned at the man's identity. Monkey D., they said to themselves, wondering if this man could have any relation to their own captain. Across the battlefield, many were surprised to see the famous Marine before them. Some shouts of "Garp, hero of the Marines," and "Vice Admiral," could be heard murmuring from the stunned soldiers and rebels. A brave rebel shouted above all the others, "What right do you have to order us? You have no clue the injustices the royals of our country have done to its own people." Vivi was in shock, staring up at the man who had saved her and had gotten the battle stop, however momentarily. Garp looked down at the princess and said, "Well, girl, this is your chance. Tell them what they need to hear." Vivi nodded before swallowing heavily and walked towards the battle. Two men were starting to push their way through the battlefield now. The two in charge of their respective armies, Pell and Koza, soon found themselves out of the front line, watching each other carefully. Both had emerged when they had seen the princess step out, and now they saw themselves standing next to their enemy. "Princess, what are you doing here?" Pell asked in surprise. "Does your father know that you are back?" "No, unfortunately, I don't think he does," Vivi said, frowning. "Right now the man in the capital is an imposter, while my father is currently either imprisoned or—" She trailed off, not wanting to think what Crocodile might have done with her father. "That's impossible," Pell said in shock. Just how could that be true? He had only left the man's side this morning, and nothing had seemed amiss. "Vivi, just what is going on here?" Koza demanded. "Both sides of this fight have been tricked into fighting one another. We have a common enemy that has deceived us all into fighting here today." Vivi began explaining to the two men who had been like family to her since childhood. Even though she hadn't seen Koza since they were children, she hoped he still shared the friendship that she felt for him. Garp had walked out into the battlefield and picked up the now unconscious man who had fired upon Vivi. "This man here is dressed as a royal guard, but he was not truly among them. This man fired upon Vivi when he spotted her, and if I were not there to stop the bullet, she would have been killed." Garp said out over the crowd, surprising them all. "One of the royal guard," some said, while others said a traitor. "It is true," Vivi shouted to the crowd as Koza and Pell listened. "Among both sides are imposters, members of Baroque works who since the very beginning of this rebellion have been working to tear this country apart," Vivi began to say, and pointed to the symbol sewn into his clothes. "That symbol there marks those among you who are traitors to this country," Vivi announced to the crowd. Some of the people began looking around at the people they had been fighting against and alongside suspiciously. Some of the imposters with the most prominent displays of their true allegiance were found out immediately. Fearing he was going to be found out, one of Koza's close advisors pointed a gun towards Vivi, but was surprised when some of the rebels tackled him to the ground, stopping him before he could. "What are you doing? You can't listen to her. They are trying to fool you all. Remember who your enemy is," he shouted desperately, hoping some would listen. The ones who were found out were stripped of their weapons as guard and rebel alike stood over them, keeping an eye on them. Koza was looking towards his men in horror as he was beginning to realize just how he had been used all this time. Someone who had been by his side through the whole rebellion had been nothing more than a viper slowly poisoning his mind against this country all along. "Just what have I done?" Koza thought to himself. "Princess, was what you said about an imposter really true? Has the king been replaced?" Pell asked desperately. How could he have let such a thing occur under his watch? "Unfortunately it is. I believe it was the imposter who orders the attack today, was it not? I cannot believe my father would willingly harm his own people," Vivi said, confident in her father's deeply held beliefs. At this, Pell hung his head low. "Not exactly, princess," he began to say. It was I who told the king that we should attack Chaka, and I felt it was the best way to ensure the safety of this kingdom. Princess Vivi looked at the man sadly as he continued to explain. You are right though. We should have suspected something was wrong when King Cobra agreed to the plan. We just thought he saw the wisdom in preventing the rebellion from going farther. We failed you, Princess, Pell said as he sunk to his knees before the princess. Koza looked at the man before him, one who moments ago he would have struck down if he had come across him in battle, but was now on the ground in shame at falling for Baroque Works' deception. Koza got down on one knee as he said, I am more to blame than anyone here. I created this entire rebellion based on lies I believed. It wasn't for me. This would have never happened. I should have put more trust in the people I once considered friends. Vivi looked at the two before her before dragging them both up again. If you think you have failed this country, then stand with me now and help me save it. Baroque Works is still working against this country, and until it is brought to justice, then this country can never heal, Vivi said, looking to her two friends. Pell and Koza nodded their heads as they looked back towards the two armies. By now most of the impostors had been sussed out. Marines under Garp's command were now escorting those who had been found out in shackles. Vivi looked to Garp and was surprised to see him napping, still holding the man who was struggling to get out of the sleeping man's firm grasp. One of the Marines cautiously tugged on the giant man's uniform, startling him out of his slumber. What's that? Oh yeah. Garp began to recall what was going on as he dropped the man onto the ground, knocking him unconscious once again. I have to thank you, Vice Admiral Garp. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to get anyone's attention, Vivi said, giving the man a quick bow. As she stood back up, she was about to ask if he had any relation to Luffy when her question was answered before she could say anything. Garp was currently standing over watching his men with one pinky digging in his nose as he watched the Baroque Works members be arrested. He has to be related to Luffy, Vivi and the rest of the Straw Hats thought to themselves as they watched Garp. Confirmation could come later. Right now they had a country to save. Back with the Luffy, Robin, and Ace, they were finally standing underneath the entrance of the impressively decorated pyramid. Surprisingly enough, two servants were standing there ready to open the door for them. Just this way if it pleases you, one of the servants said as they opened the doors. As they walked past, they were greeted by a few more servants who began to lead them deeper into the casino. Robin, however, stopped them before they could reach the trap door. How about you take us the long way? Robin said, giving the servant a look that sent a shiver down to his core. Of course, miss. The servant stuttered as he took them around the trapdoor and towards the stairwell down into Crocodile's lair. The great warlord Crocodile is awaiting you, the servant said, bowing deeply as he gestured down the stairs. Thank you. That will be all now, Robin said, dismissing the man, who gladly took the dismissal and scurried away. The three stood at the top of the stairs looking down into the fight that surely awaited them when they went down below. Ace looked at his brother. He was having a lot of trouble accepting all of that which Luffy had told him out in the desert. Some things were hard to believe, but seeing the look in his brother's eye, he was starting to think that it might all be true. Being from the future, nearly dying from the hands of some fleet admiral, and ultimately being given a new devil fruit and being sent back in time to keep his crew from dying. Ace knew there was a lot he hadn't told him. He couldn't put his finger on what exactly, but there was a hollowness in his brother's eye that told him he was omitting something terrible that had happened, something bad enough that he refused to share it with him. Luffy had told him all about Blackbeard's grand plan, though, to turn Luffy in so that he could become a warlord, only so he could immediately betray the Marines by breaking out some of the strongest criminals to ever be sent to Impel Down. The betrayal didn't really surprise him too much. It seemed to be Blackbeard's standard play nowadays. Get in good with a group and stab them in the back when they weren't expecting it. It explained why Blackbeard would want to join the warlords at least. Then Luffy had explained to him the war between Blackbeard and Whitebeard, the one that would eventually lead to Whitebeard's death and Blackbeard stealing his power, which in itself seemed impossible. The fact that Luffy was somehow able to explain precisely how Blackbeard and Whitebeard's devil fruits worked despite never having seen either in action had helped prove that Luffy was telling the truth. But to be honest, he never needed an explanation from his brother. Luffy was his closest kin left in the world. And if Luffy said that was the truth, then Ace believed him. It seemed too absurd to lie about anyway. But seeing the look in Luffy's eye now, he couldn't help but notice just how old he looked now. There was something in his eyes that seemed to try and hide the pain he had experienced. Something had definitely changed with his brother, and now he was starting to see just how much it had. It seemed somewhere along the line he had lost his kid brother, and now a man stood toe-to-toe with him. This was going to take some getting used to. Now was not the time to dwell on this, though. They had a warlord to take down, and as Luffy took the first step, he found himself following close behind with Robin on their tail. Crocodile wasn't going to know what hit him. Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.